What's up everyone? You're here at Vision Harry. We're dropping something epic today. McGonagall read Harry's medical file at a staff meeting. She resigned before Dumbledore spoke. Like and subscribe if you enjoy. Let's get started. Chapter 1. The file. The staff meeting was supposed to be about the end-of-term reports. That was how it always went. Last Wednesday of June, the school nearly empty, the great corridors echoing in that particular way they only did when the students were gone. The castle itself seemed to exhale when the children left, settling into its old bones, radiating a kind of dusty, comfortable silence that every professor who'd spent 20 or more years within its walls had grown to love. Minerva McGonagall was no exception. She liked the quiet. She liked the stack of unmarked third-year Transfiguration essays on her desk that she was finally going to get through without interruption. She liked June. She did not, as a rule, like staff meetings. But she tolerated them. She sat in her usual chair, third from Dumbledore's right, where the window threw afternoon light across the table, and she opened her leather notebook and she waited for the whole thing to be over. The room was full. Sprout sat across from her with a smear of dragon dung fertilizer on her left sleeve that she either hadn't noticed or didn't care about. Flitwick was beside her, feet dangling. Snape was at the far end of the table looking as though attendance was a personal affront. Trelawney had floated in on a cloud of incense and immediately knocked over Hooch's cup of tea and seemed to regard this as a prophecy. Vector, babbling, Sinistra. Lupin, newest addition to the table, sat quietly near the middle, hands folded, looking as though he hadn't slept properly in a month. Given what Minerva knew of his condition, this was probably accurate. Dumbledore sat at the head of the table in his deep purple robes, half-moon glasses low on his nose, projecting the particular warmth and stillness of a man who had never once in his life been surprised. He smiled at her when she sat down. She nodded back. This had been their shorthand for decades. Her nod, his smile, the whole silent vocabulary of a professional relationship that had survived more than most marriages. The meeting began as they always did. Sprout reported on Greenhouse 7's Mimbulus Mimbletonia infestation. Hooch complained about the state of the Quidditch equipment budget and did not stop complaining until Dumbledore gently redirected her. Flitwick raised the matter of the charms curriculum and whether the fourth years were adequately prepared for the complexity jump in fifth year. Snape said nothing for 40 minutes and then said something devastatingly accurate about the quality of the student population's attention spans, and Minerva agreed with him, which she could tell he found almost as unpleasant as disagreeing with her. Normal. All entirely normal. And then Dumbledore said, "Before we close, I'd like to distribute the annual student welfare summaries. Standard procedure, a chance for heads of house to review the pastoral notes on students of concern. If you'd all take the relevant files for your houses." Madame Pomfrey came in from the side door with a floating stack of folders, each one color-coded by house. She set them down with the brisk efficiency of a woman who had more important things to do and was perfectly aware of it. Dumbledore was already talking about the summer schedule, something about the maintenance of the fourth-floor corridor, and everyone was half listening and reaching for their folders because the sooner they reviewed them, the sooner they could leave. Minerva took the Gryffindor file from the stack. Red border, gold clasp. She opened it. The first few student summaries were unremarkable. Boot, Longbottom, Weasley, she scanned them with the practiced efficiency of someone who had done this 100 times. Notes from Pomfrey, academic observations, a flag on Neville's anxiety around examinations that she made a mental note to address in September. All normal. All. She turned to the next divider tab. Potter, Harry James. She pulled the summary page out and read it. Then she stopped. She read it again. The conversation in the room continued around her. Flitwick was saying something. Dumbledore laughed quietly at a remark from Sprout. The window behind her let in the smell of the grounds, cut grass and something floral from the direction of the greenhouses. All of it very distant. The first page was Madame Pomfrey's medical log. Not a summary, the full log, which was unusual. Normally the welfare files contained a single-page overview, notable conditions, current concerns. This was the full document, decades of it, going back to Harry's first term. She didn't know why it had been included in full. She suspected, later, that Poppy had put it there deliberately, that it had been Poppy's small, deniable, unignorable act of conscience. At the time she simply read it. September 1991. Patient presents, malnourished, notable underweight for age and height. Vitamin D deficiency consistent with limited sun exposure. Multiple healed fractures, wrist and forearm, improperly set, evidence of prior breaks sustained before enrollment. Patient states heat falls a lot. Patient demonstrates significant anxiety response when questioned about home environment. No action taken at direction of headmaster. Minerva's hand flattened against the page. December 1991. Patient presents post-incident with quarrel. Secondary examination reveals bruising consistent with physical restraint, both wrists. Patient is 11 years old. She turned the page. June 1992. Patient presents at end of term. Weight down from September. Iron deficient. Flinches from unexpected physical contact. States he is fine. States this several times. Another page. November 1992. Patient presents with broken arm following Quidditch incident, Lockhart's removal of bones noted, treated with Skill Grow, full bone regrowth successful. However, secondary notation, reviewing full skeleton via diagnostic charm, patient shows evidence of prior untreated fracture of 3 ribs, completely healed, origin unclear. Patient is 12 years old. Patient does not know how to answer when asked if anyone hurt him. He looks confused by the question. The room was still talking. Minerva was aware of this in the same way you're aware of wind when you're underwater. June 1993. End of term assessment, 3rd year. Patient weight restored from previous year low. Patient has been resident at school for the majority of the past 3 years. Note, patient is noticeably healthier at school than at return from summer. Improvement in weight, pallor, and alertness consistently observed upon arrival in September and consistently reversed upon examination in June prior to return to primary guardians. Pattern consistent across all 3 years. Patient has disclosed nothing regarding home environment. Patient is 13. Patient thanked me for the assessment. He thanked me for it. Like it was a gift someone gave him. There was a handwritten note clipped to the bottom of this last page. Not a formal medical notation. Just Poppy's ordinary handwriting on a piece of parchment, the kind you'd dash off in the middle of the night. Minerva, I know you'll read this last. I know why I'm giving you the full file instead of the summary. I've been flagging this to the headmaster since 1991. I have copies of every conversation. I am tired. Do something. Minerva set the file down. She set it down very carefully, the way you set down something fragile, or something that has become suddenly, incomprehensibly heavy. She looked at the table in front of her. The grain of the wood. The ring from someone's teacup, old stain, never quite charmed out. She looked at her own hands. Dumbledore was saying something about the Hogsmeade permission letters for next year. His voice was warm and measured and completely untroubled. She looked at him. She looked at him for a long time, and she thought about 30 years of Albus knows best and there are factors at play that we don't fully understand and he has a plan and the greater good, Minerva, the greater good, all of it, 3 decades of it, sitting in her chest like a stone she hadn't known was there until this exact moment when she felt its full weight. She thought about Harry Potter at age 11 years old, who thanked Poppy Pomfrey for a medical examination. Because it was a gift. Someone had touched him gently and asked if he was hurting, and for Harry Potter that had apparently been so unusual that he said thank you. She closed the folder. She stood up. The sound of her chair pushed back was loud enough to interrupt Dumbledore mid-sentence. Several heads turned. She was already pulling her resignation letter from inside her robes. She didn't have a resignation letter, obviously, she hadn't come in this morning planning to resign, but she had parchment and a quick quotes quill, and she was a witch of considerable power and considerable precision, and she had it written in 10 seconds flat, sealed with her personal crest, and she placed it on the table in front of Dumbledore's folded hands. "I resign," she said. "Effective immediately." Silence. Real silence, now. Not the kind with Flitwick talking underneath it. The kind where 11 professors stare at one of their own and understand collectively that something has just shattered. Dumbledore looked up at her. His expression was what it always was, gentle, attentive, maddeningly calm. He opened his mouth. "Don't," she said. She said it quietly. She was not a woman who shouted when the alternative was precision. "Whatever you are about to say," she said, "I have read enough tonight to know I don't want to hear it." She picked up her folder. Her notebook. Her quill. She looked around the table at her colleagues, Sprout, open-mouthed, Flitwick, very still, Lupin, white as chalk, Snape, whose expression had done something complicated that she didn't have time to interpret. "Poppy," she said, and her voice only did one thing it shouldn't, once, very briefly, "thank you for the complete file." From the doorway, where Poppy had paused on her way out, there was a small nod. Her eyes were bright. Her jaw was set. She looked like a woman who had been waiting a very long time for someone to say something. Minerva walked out. She did not go back to her office. Her office was part of Hogwarts, and Hogwarts was, for the moment, unbearable. She went to the grounds. It was still light, the long gold light of a Scottish June evening, and the grass smelled like summer, and the black lake sat flat and dark in the distance, and she walked until she reached the beech tree by the water's edge where she had sat perhaps 1,000 times over the course of her career. She sat down against it now, and she did what she had not allowed herself to do in the staff room. She read the file again. All of it. Every page. It took 40 minutes. By the end of it, she was not crying. She was not the sort of woman who cried. She was the sort of woman who got very, very still and very, very cold, and if you had known her long enough you would have been frightened by the look on her face, because it did not look like grief. It looked like calculation. The broken wrists. The broken ribs, healed wrong. The wait in September. The wait in June. The pattern, year after year, consistent and documented and signed off on, Dumbledore's own notation at the back of every welfare file, placement reviewed. Placement maintained. A.D. Harry Potter, who thanked people for being kind to him. Who had spent the last 3 years at this school and every summer before and between at number 4, Privet Drive, with the Dursleys, who were supposed to be his family, and who were, based on the evidence in this folder, something else entirely. And she had not known. She had not known, and she needed to sit with that, with the specific texture of her own failure, because she was not a woman who looked away from hard things. She had been his head of house for 3 years. She had taught him. She had watched him walk into the Great Hall on his very first night and seen Gryffindor light up in the Sorting Hat's verdict and felt something very close to pride, though she would never have called it that out loud. She had watched him for 3 years and she had not seen. Because she hadn't looked. Because she'd told herself someone else was looking. Because Dumbledore had said the placement was necessary, blood wards, ancient magic, and she had nodded and gone back to her marking and trusted, the way she had always trusted, the way they all had. The way Poppy apparently had not. Poppy, who had flagged it and been told to let it go, and who had ultimately decided that if no one in authority was going to do anything about it, she was going to put every single piece of documentation in front of the one person she thought might actually act. She pulled out a fresh piece of parchment. She had letters to write. The first went to Amelia Bones, director of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, whom she had known since they were in school together, who was the most relentlessly competent woman in the British wizarding government, and who owed her nothing and would do this anyway because she was Amelia Bones and she believed in the law in the way a knife believes in cutting. The second went to her solicitor, Aldrich Von Price, of Von Price and Associates, Diagon Alley, who was the best magical family law practitioner in Scotland and who had handled more child guardianship cases than anyone currently working. She wrote both letters with perfect clarity and no wasted words and sealed them with her personal crest and attached them to 2 school owls she intercepted at the Ollery. She had been head of this school long enough to know exactly when the evening post went out. The 3rd letter she held in her hand for a long time without writing. Then she wrote, "Harry, this is Professor McGonagall. I will be coming to collect you from your aunt and uncle's home on Friday. Please be ready. You will not be returning there. You haven't done anything wrong. This is not a punishment. Professor M. McGonagall." She folded it. She sent it. She sat back against the beech tree in the long gold light and looked at the lake and thought, carefully and methodically, about what happened next. Harry had been at Privet Drive for 9 days. 9 days was not very long and also it was eternal. It was the specific eternity of a small bedroom with a broken window latch and the sound of Dudley's video games through the wall and meals you ate standing up in the kitchen after everyone else had finished. It was the eternity of being tolerated rather than wanted, which was a different thing from being hated, and in some ways harder to name. He was sitting on the roof of the garden shed, a perch he'd discovered at age 7 and returned to reliably ever since, because the Dursleys never looked up, reading a defense against the dark arts textbook that Lupin had lent him at the end of term with the note, "I thought you might find chapters 7 through 9 particularly useful," written on the flyleaf. He had read chapters 7 through 9 4 times. He'd also read the rest of the book twice, and was currently on a 3rd pass of chapter 11, which was about the theory of corporeal Patronus conjuration and which he kept returning to not because he didn't understand it but because something about understanding it and not yet being able to do it was satisfying in a specific way, like having a map to a place you hadn't been yet. The owl found him there, which he found both impressive and slightly alarming, because school owls were not known for initiative. He read the letter 3 times. "You will not be returning there." He sat on the shed roof for a long time after that. The sky was the color of old pewter in the late afternoon, threatening rain that hadn't arrived yet. Next door, Mrs. Number 6 was shouting at her cat. Everything was entirely ordinary. "You haven't done anything wrong. This is not a punishment." He'd had letters from the school before. He'd had letters from McGonagall specifically, usually about Quidditch schedules or the reminder that 3rd years were not permitted to keep pets in the common room unless they were owls, rats, or cats, which had been specifically sent to him after he'd tried to keep a garden frog in his dormitory in 2nd year on a dare from George Weasley. This letter was different. He folded it carefully and put it in his pocket. Then he climbed off the shed and went inside and went upstairs to his room, and he sat on his bed, and Hedwig looked at him from her cage with the particular expression she had when she was waiting to find out whether they were leaving somewhere or staying, because in Harry's experience these were the only 2 relevant categories of situation. "She's coming Friday," he told her. Hedwig blinked. "I don't know why," he said. He did not say "I think I might know why," which was the true thing, because saying it out loud made it real and he wasn't sure he was ready for it to be real. He knew what Madame Pomfrey wrote down when she examined him. He knew because he'd once picked up his file off her desk while she was fetching something and read the top page in about 30 seconds before putting it back, because he was quick and he'd spent a long time learning to gather information fast. He'd read, "Patient is notably underweight, patient presents with healed fractures, patient demonstrates anxiety response." He'd put it down and he hadn't thought about it. Or he'd thought about it in the specific way you think about things you've decided not to examine closely, which is not the same as thinking about them at all. Friday, he thought. He started packing. Dumbledore came to find her that night. She had expected this. He was not a man who let things sit. She was in her rooms, not her school quarters, which she was already, with some decisiveness, in the process of mentally vacating, but the private set of rooms she kept on the 2nd floor, separate from her office, where she had lived for decades and where her own things were, her books, her cat, the good tartan blanket and a bottle of Caledonian Fire whiskey she kept for actual emergencies. She had poured a glass. She had not touched it. She sat in her armchair with the resignation letter she'd given him sitting on the table beside her, along with copies she'd made of every relevant page in Harry's welfare file, copies she'd made before she'd left the staff room because she had learned, early in her years working with Albus Dumbledore, to document everything. The knock at her door was soft and courteous, as it always was. "Come in," she said, because telling him to go away would have required a different kind of energy than the one she currently had, and the one she currently had was cold and precise and required him to be present for it. He came in. He looked as he always did, tall, robed, his white beard tucked neatly over his silver-buttoned chest, half-moon spectacles catching the candlelight. He carried none of the discomfort the situation might have imposed on a lesser man. That had always been one of his most formidable qualities, that complete, undisturbable composure, and she noted it now with different eyes. He sat down in the chair across from her without being invited. Also as he always did. "Minerva," he said. "I think we should, did you know," she said, "about the broken wrists." He paused. Very briefly. So briefly that if she hadn't been watching for it she might have missed it. "The blood wards," he began. "Did you know," she said again, and her voice was the same temperature it had been all evening, which was somewhere well below the freezing point of ordinary conversation, "about the broken ribs. The 3 ribs. Healed without treatment. Before he was 11. Minerva, the placement was not made without consideration of, before he was 11, Albus." The fire crackled. Outside, the grounds were dark now, the lake invisible, the sky thick with the promised rain. In the silence between them, 30 years of professional closeness sat like an object on the floor, something substantial and heavy that they were both aware of and neither of them acknowledged. Dumbledore looked at her over his spectacles. His eyes were, as they always were, very blue and very steady. "I understand you're upset," he said. "I'm not upset," she said. "Upset is for small things. When I received a bad mark in Transfiguration at 16, I was upset. What I am now is something considerably more specific. The blood wards that protect Harry at Privet Drive," he said, patient and measured, "are ancient magic tied to Lily's sacrifice. As long as Harry can call that house home, Voldemort cannot touch him. I have weighed this carefully, Minerva, over many years. Every difficulty in Harry's life there must be balanced against the alternative, which is, don't," she said. He stopped. "Don't do that," she said. "Don't put Voldemort in the room. Don't make this a calculation where the abuse of a child is the acceptable side of the scales because the other side has a Dark Lord on it. Don't do that in front of me, Albus. Not tonight." Something moved in his face, then. Something that was not quite regret and not quite guilt and was possibly just the memory of both, something old and practiced, worn smooth. She had seen that look before, over the years, and she had always found it humanizing. She found it, now, simply difficult to look at. "The resignation stands," she said. "I've already been in contact with Amelia Bones and with a family law solicitor. I'm collecting Harry from Privet Drive on Friday. Whatever arrangements you have in place regarding his guardianship, I suggest you have your own solicitor review them, because I intend to have them reviewed very carefully." A beat. "I see," Dumbledore said. His voice had not changed, which was itself a thing she noted. "And have you thought about what you're setting in motion, Minerva?" "The political implications, I have thought," she said, "about an 11-year-old boy who thanked Poppy Pomfrey for a medical examination. I have thought about very little else this evening." He looked at her. She looked at him. The fire went on crackling. "You've been one of my most trusted colleagues for 30 years, he said quietly. "Yes," she said. "I have. And I trusted you, Albus, for every single one of them. And you used that trust to keep me quiet and keep me comfortable and keep me not looking too closely at the things you decided I didn't need to see." She stopped. "I'm not angry that you didn't tell me. I'm angry that I didn't ask. Those are different kinds of anger, and I'll be sitting with both of them for a long time. But only one of them is yours to carry." He rose. He was quiet for a moment, standing, the way a man is quiet when he is deciding whether the next thing he says will be a bridge or a wall. Harry's safety, he said at last, has always been my first concern. Then we should have no quarrel, she said, about what I intend to do next. He left. She sat alone in her chair and she looked at the fire and she picked up the glass of fire whiskey and she drank it in one go and she put the glass down and she went to bed. She did not sleep especially well. She hadn't expected to. Lupin came to her door at 11:30. She heard the knock and sat up immediately. She had been lying on top of the covers, still half-dressed, not sleeping, and said, "Who is it?" in the tone of voice that had made seventh years cry. "Lupin," he said, from the other side of the door. "I'm sorry. I know it's late. May I?" She got up and opened the door. He looked terrible. He had always looked somewhat terrible, the lines in his face, the gray in his hair that had no business being there on a man of 33, the permanent exhaustion around his eyes, but right now he looked specifically terrible in the way people look when they've spent a few hours fighting with themselves and lost. "You knew," she said. Not as an accusation, exactly. As a statement of something she had intuited and was verifying. He closed his eyes briefly. "Not the details. Not the full file. I knew something was wrong. In first year. I knew and I didn't. I asked Dumbledore. He told me it was managed. I believed him." He opened his eyes. "I'm sorry, Minerva." "Come in," she said. He sat in the chair Dumbledore had vacated. She made tea, not because either of them particularly wanted tea, but because something had to be done with hands in moments like this. "He was James's son," Lupin said, quiet, not quite steady. "He was James and Lily's boy and I knew him and I didn't. I should have." "Yes," she said. Not unkindly. "You should have." He looked up at her. "That's why I'm telling you now," she said, setting his tea in front of him. "Because should have is where you are. And it doesn't help anyone for you to stay there. The question is what happens next." She sat down. "On Friday I'm going to Privet Drive. What can you tell me about those wards that Dumbledore couldn't simply charm me into believing?" Lupin straightened slightly. There was something that happened in his face, a refocusing, a shift from guilt to purpose, that she found encouraging. "The blood wards are real," he said. "They exist. I've read the original casting. Lily's death wove the protection into Harry himself, not into the house. The anchor is Harry, not the address. The wards function as long as Harry has at least one blood relative living, and as long as he considers that house his home." He paused. "The second condition is about Harry's perception of home, not the physical location. It's a subtle point, and Dumbledore has always emphasized the house, but the actual magical theory means the wards don't require Harry to be miserable," she said. "They require him to have a home." "Technically," Lupin said carefully. "Yes." She looked at him steadily. "Which he can have somewhere other than Privet Drive." "In theory. If the bond between Harry and his guardian is established in a way that the magic accepts," he stopped. "Dumbledore will argue otherwise. He'll say the wording requires the blood relative, specifically. He'll say a lot of things. I intend to have people better versed in ancient magic than either of us verify what the wording actually requires." She picked up her tea. "Are you with me, Remus, or are you going to continue being sorry from a distance?" The silence that followed was only a few seconds long. But it was a real silence, the kind where a person is making an actual choice, not just the appearance of one. "I'm with you," he said. "Good," she said. "You can start by writing down everything you just told me about the wards. Tonight, while it's fresh. I need documentation of the magical theory that doesn't come only from Dumbledore's interpretation." He nodded. He pulled out parchment. He started writing at her coffee table while she watched, and she thought that whatever came next, she was glad to have him on the right side of it. Outside, it finally started to rain. The castle took it in, that sound, the way it always did, quietly, completely, without complaint. In 9 days she was going to Privet Drive. There was a great deal to do before then. Harry woke up on the third morning after the letter arrived to find a second one on his pillow, which meant the owl had gotten in through the broken window latch, which meant he really ought to tell someone about the broken window latch. He unfolded it. It was brief. Harry, bring everything you care about. You won't be coming back for it. McGonagall. He lay on his back and looked at the ceiling of the smallest bedroom and thought about everything he cared about that was in this room. Hedwig. His wand. His photo album. His books. His firebolt, which he'd have to smuggle past Dudley's room to get to the cupboard under the stairs where Uncle Vernon had locked it. He thought about the word everything and how small a pile it was. He thought about what it meant that she knew there was anything here worth saving. He got up. He started packing properly this time, methodically, everything, the way you pack when you're not coming back. Outside the window, the Privet Drive street went about its ordinary business. Cars, neighbors, the smell of someone's lawn being cut. All of it entirely unaware that on Friday, something was going to happen here that would change rather a lot of things. Harry zipped up his trunk. He sat on his bed and he held the letter and he read it one more time and he tried very hard not to hope for anything in particular, because hoping for things was something he'd learned to be careful with, but he was 13 years old and someone had just told him he wasn't coming back here, and he was made of more than just caution. He was also made of the part that had grown up knowing something was wrong and never having anyone confirm it. You haven't done anything wrong, she had written, in the first letter. You won't be coming back for it. He folded both letters carefully and put them in the inner pocket of his jacket, close. He waited for Friday. Chapter 2, The Lion Comes Calling. Friday arrived the way important days often do, quietly, without announcement, looking exactly like any other morning from the outside. Harry was up before 6. He'd been up before 6 every day since the letter, actually, not because he set an alarm but because his body had developed, over years of Privet Drive summers, the reliable habit of waking before the Dursleys so he could have the kitchen to himself for 20 minutes. It was the only peace the house offered and he'd learned to take it. He'd make tea he wasn't supposed to have, stand at the kitchen window watching the street go grey-pink with early light, and be done and back upstairs before Uncle Vernon's alarm went off at 6:30. This morning he stood at the window and drank his tea and looked at the empty street and thought, today. His trunk was packed. Had been packed since Tuesday. He'd taken it apart twice and repacked it, making sure he hadn't forgotten anything, and then he'd made himself stop because repacking it a third time would have been about anxiety rather than thoroughness and he could at least recognize the difference. The firebolt was retrieved, he'd waited until 2 in the morning when the house was fully asleep, eased past Dudley's door which groaned on its hinge, taken the broom from the cupboard with the careful silence of someone who'd had years of practice being invisible in this house. He'd wrapped it in his old school robe and strapped it to the side of his trunk. Hedwig's cage was ready to go. Hedwig herself was out, she'd taken herself off 2 nights ago, which she did sometimes, some owl instinct about when she was and wasn't needed, but she'd be back. She always came back. He went upstairs and sat on his bare mattress, he'd stripped it, rolled up the bedding, shoved it in a corner, because he was leaving and he wanted to take nothing that belonged to this room, and he waited. The Dursleys woke up. He heard them move through the house in their usual order, Uncle Vernon's heavy tread to the bathroom, the shower, the footsteps downstairs. Aunt Petunia's lighter step. Dudley's door, the creak of the stair that only groaned under Dudley's particular weight. The sound of the morning beginning without him, because in this house he was usually either invisible or in the way, and right now he was choosing invisible. He didn't know exactly when McGonagall was coming. She hadn't specified a time, only Friday, and he was realizing that Friday covered a fairly large number of hours. He'd been ready since 7 a.m. It was now 8:30. He heard Aunt Petunia's step on the stair. She stopped at his door. He could hear her breathing on the other side of it, that particular pause that meant she was deciding something. Then, you'd better come down. There's cereal. He stared at the door. Aunt Petunia almost never spoke to him directly if she could help it. Certainly not to offer food. I'm fine, he said. Thank you. A longer pause. Then her footsteps retreated, and he heard her on the stairs, and he sat back and thought, she knows someone's coming. He wasn't sure how she knew. But she'd always had that quality, Aunt Petunia, a sort of twitchy surveillance instinct that missed very little. She'd known when he received letters before they arrived. She'd known when Dumbledore had sent his squib neighbor to watch the house in second year. Harry hadn't known about Mrs. Figg's actual function until much later, but Petunia had clearly had some idea, because she'd been fractionally better behaved in the summers where Mrs. Figg visited more frequently. So she knew. Or suspected. And she'd offered him cereal, which was either guilt or self-preservation, and he was 13 and not interested in figuring out which. He stayed in his room. McGonagall arrived at 11:15. He knew it was her before he heard anything, because Hedwig swept in through the window at 11 sharp, punctual, self-satisfied, the way she always arrived when she'd been somewhere interesting, and landed on his knee and looked at the door. Just looked at it. Harry had always found Hedwig's intelligence slightly uncanny, and he didn't argue with it. At 11:15, there was a knock at the front door. Not a ring of the doorbell. A knock. 3 times, evenly spaced, the knock of someone who was entirely certain they were going to be let in. He heard Uncle Vernon go to answer it, his heavy step in the hallway, the rattle of the chain lock, the door opening. Then silence. The kind of silence that meant Vernon Dursley had opened his door and found something on his front step that had stripped his immediate capacity for bluster. Harry stood up. He picked up Hedwig's cage in one hand and took the handle of his trunk in the other. He opened his bedroom door. From the top of the stairs he could see the front hallway and the open door and McGonagall standing in it, and even from up here the effect of her was considerable. She was in full teaching robes, dark green, impeccably pressed, the kind of formal that wasn't ceremonial but purposeful, and she had her wand in her hand, not raised, just held, the way someone holds something they're comfortable with. She had the expression she wore when a student had made an error significant enough to warrant her full attention. Uncle Vernon was in his dressing gown. He'd been about to do the garden. He had gardening gloves in one hand and a cup of tea in the other, and he looked like a man who was only belatedly understanding that the armor he'd relied on his whole life, size, noise, ordinary suburban authority, did not function against this particular visitor. "Mr. Dursley," McGonagall said. "I'm here for Harry. His things, and himself." "Now look here," Vernon started. "I'm not here to discuss anything with you," she said. It was not rude. It was simply fact, delivered at a temperature that suggested the discussion he was trying to begin had already been assessed and found unnecessary. "I am here to collect Harry. If you'd like to formally contest his removal, I can give you the contact details for a ministry solicitor. The process will take approximately 4 to 6 months, during which time every relevant authority will be reviewing Harry's welfare documentation in some detail. I leave the decision to you." Harry came down the stairs. Uncle Vernon heard him and turned, and the look on his face was the one Harry knew best, the red-necked fury barely holding its own shape, but there was something underneath it now that Harry didn't usually see. Something that might have been, if you were feeling charitable, shame. More likely it was the instinct of a man who understood, suddenly and completely, that someone with the capacity to do something about what happened in this house was standing in his hallway. Aunt Petunia had appeared at the kitchen door. She looked at Harry. Her face was the blank, composed mask she wore when she was controlling something, and he looked back at her and thought, not for the first time, about how she must have known. She'd always known, on some level. She'd been the one who was here. He didn't say anything to her. He didn't think there was anything to say. McGonagall looked at him when he reached the bottom of the stairs. Her eyes went over him the way Madame Pomfrey's did, quick, thorough, cataloguing, and something in her jaw tightened. Then she looked at his trunk and his cage and his rolled-up firebolt and she said, "Is that everything?" "Yes," he said. She took the trunk from him with a charm before he could protest, floating it neatly out the open front door and down the garden path. Then she looked at Vernon, once, the kind of look that was a full stop rather than a period, and she walked out without another word. Harry followed her. He did not look back at the house. He wanted to. He'd expected to. But he got to the garden gate and he stopped, waiting to feel the pull of something, nostalgia, grief, some irrational attachment to the only home he'd ever known, and instead he felt the June sun on his face and the warm weight of Hedwig shifting in her cage and nothing else, nothing that wanted to make him go back. He went through the gate. McGonagall was standing on the pavement. She'd already set his trunk down beside her, or rather suspended it 2 inches above the pavement with a casual maintenance charm, and she had a small leather folder under one arm that radiated the same atmosphere as her general person, which was organized, considered, and not to be trifled with. She looked at him with the same directness she used in the classroom, which he'd always found easier than most people's directness because at least you always knew where you were with it. "Are you all right?" she asked. "Yeah," he said. She studied him for a moment in a way that suggested she was deciding whether to accept that answer or interrogate it. She apparently decided to accept it, for now, because she gave a short nod and said, "Good. We're going to apparate. I'll need you to hold on to my arm, side along. Have you done it before?" "No. It's unpleasant the first time. Hold on tightly and don't try to resist the pull." She offered her arm, left elbow bent toward him, with the matter-of-fact briskness of someone who had apparat with reluctant students before. "Trunk and cage will come with us." He took her arm. Her robes were stiff, formal fabric, and she was thin but solid in the way that wiry, determined people were solid. He held on. "On 3, she said. The world came apart in an extremely unpleasant way. He had been warned it was unpleasant and the warning was accurate, a sensation like being pushed through a tube several sizes too small, the complete absence of air, the disorientation of being nowhere for a fraction of a second and then, Edinburgh. He knew it was Edinburgh because the sky was different, Scottish sky, higher and greyer and wilder, and they were standing on a cobbled street outside a tall stone townhouse on a crescent, Georgian windows, window boxes with something purple trailing out of them. The city spread upward behind them to a castle on a rock that made Hogwarts look planned. "Inside," McGonagall said, already moving toward the door. His trunk floated after her. He followed, still slightly compressed feeling from the apparition. Inside was immediately warm. Not warm in the way that a house is warm when the heating is left on, warm in the way that a house is warm when someone lives in it properly, when there are books and rugs and the smell of something being cooked somewhere, when the spaces have been occupied by a person who has opinions about their environment. It was a tall-ceilinged hallway with a staircase running up the right side and a tabby cat sitting at the top of the first flight looking down at them with the specific patience of an animal who had been expecting this. Harry stared at the cat. The cat looked at him with eyes that had very distinctive markings around them, square, precise, like spectacle frames, and a bearing that was, frankly, authoritative. "That's Ptolemy," McGonagall said, heading down the hallway. "He's lived here longer than I have and he knows it." Ptolemy descended 3 stairs and sniffed at Harry's ankle and then returned to his position and resumed being authoritative. "I've put you in the first-floor room," she said, pushing open a door at the end of the hallway to reveal a kitchen in a state of active use, a pot on the stove, several things chopped on the board, parchment and folders spread across one half of a long wooden table. "Your things can go upstairs. Are you hungry?" He opened his mouth to say "I'm fine, thank you" and caught himself. He was, in fact, hungry. He'd had a piece of toast at 6 this morning and nothing since. "Yes," he said. She glanced at him. If she found anything significant about this answer she kept it to herself, just indicated the table and turned back to the stove with the efficiency of someone who cooked not for pleasure but because it was a necessary process and she intended to do it correctly. He sat down at the table. Ptolemy appeared at his elbow from nowhere. He looked at the parchment spread across the other half of the table, mostly out of habit. He'd always gathered information reflexively, read anything that was in reading range. He stopped himself. The folders had labels. He recognized one of them, his name. He looked at that folder. It sat there. He looked away from it and looked at Ptolemy instead, who was performing the ancient cat ritual of making himself appear extremely inconvenient while also being impossible to dislike. "The folder you're not looking at," McGonagall said from the stove, without turning around, "is your Hogwarts welfare file. You're allowed to read it if you want." He went very still. "I'm not going to tell you it's pleasant reading," she said, still in the same matter-of-fact tone. "But it's about you, and you should know what's in it." "I've read the top page," he said. "Once." "I know." A pause. "How?" Madame Pomfrey turned her back for 30 seconds. "I read fast." Something in her posture shifted. It might have been the closest she came to a smile in this particular conversation. "Yes, I expect you do." She put a plate down in front of him. Soup, thick and dark, with bread beside it, the kind of meal that had clearly been made by someone who knew what good food was and had made it deliberately. "Eat. We'll talk when you're done." He ate. He was aware, in the way he was always aware of these things, that he was eating quickly and had to make himself slow down, and he was aware that she could see this from where she sat across the table, now, with her own tea and her own folder open, reading. She didn't comment on it. Halfway through the soup he said, "Why did you resign?" She looked up. "Before," he said. "You sent the letter 2 days ago." "The date?" "That was the day of the end-of-term staff meeting." She looked at him for a moment. He had the impression she was revising her assessment of something. "I resigned because I read your welfare file at the staff meeting," she said. In full. For the first time. She said this with a particular precision that he understood was not an excuse but a specific statement of fact. She had not read it before, she was saying clearly, and she was not pretending otherwise. He absorbed this. He finished the soup. He pushed the bowl aside and then, slowly, pulled the folder toward him. He read it. It took him longer than 30 seconds this time. She waited, reading her own things, not watching him, which he was grateful for. Ptolemy had migrated to a chair and was asleep. The kitchen was quiet except for the distant city sounds of Edinburgh through the windows and the small clock on the wall and the sound of pages turning. He reached the end. He sat with it. He thought about the word normal and how he'd spent a very long time telling himself that things at Privet Drive were normal, or close enough to normal, or at least his version of normal, which probably wasn't everyone's version but was the only one he had, and therefore he should stop. Patient demonstrates anxiety response when questioned about home environment. Patient states he is fine. States this several times. He had said that. He'd sat on Madame Pomfrey's white bed and said, "I'm fine, thank you," and meant it as a way of ending the conversation, which was a different thing from meaning it as a statement of fact, but he'd never thought about the difference before. He closed the folder. McGonagall was watching him now. Not with the evaluative look she used in class. Something different. Something that reminded him, distantly, of the feeling of someone sitting close to you in the dark without asking anything, just being there. "I'm not going to ask you to say anything about it," she said. "Not today." "Okay," he said. "I am going to tell you what I'm doing about it. Because it affects you, and you should know. And I'm going to ask you some questions, practical ones, and you can answer as much or as little as you want." She straightened. "Do you understand what a guardianship hearing is?" "Roughly," he said. "Someone decides legally who looks after you." "In the wizarding world, yes. The Wisengamot assigns a board of review in cases involving magical children and questions of guardianship. I've filed a petition with the DMLE, the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, to have your current guardianship arrangement reviewed. That process has begun." She paused. "Dumbledore will contest it." "Of course he will," Harry said. She looked at him with an expression he couldn't immediately read. "You expected that," she said. "He put me there," Harry said simply. He's not going to be happy about someone deciding he was wrong. Another beat. Something passed across her face, briefly, that he couldn't name. No, she said. He won't. She looked down at her folder. There are several things I'm going to need your help with. When you're ready. The hearing will require your testimony about conditions at your guardian's home. You don't have to decide now whether you're willing to give that. I'll give it, he said. Not quickly, not like he was trying to seem brave. Just as a fact, the way you state something you've already decided. When do I need to? We're probably 4 to 6 weeks away from a preliminary hearing. Plenty of time. She gathered the folders together into a neat stack. You'll stay here in the meantime. I've already spoken to the Board of Review about interim arrangements. She looked up. There is one other matter I have to tell you about. And I want you to hear it from me before you hear it from anyone else or anywhere else. He waited. I've also filed a petition on behalf of Sirius Black, she said. Your godfather. For a formal trial. The kitchen was quiet. He never had one, Harry said. His voice was very level. No, she said. He didn't. That's the petition. That he received the trial he was denied 12 years ago. Harry sat back in his chair and looked at the ceiling for a moment. He was thinking about the night in the Shrieking Shack, which felt like 1,000 years ago and also like last week. He was thinking about Sirius's hollow face and his shaking hands and the thing he'd said, I'm going to be free. He'd not been free. Peter Pettigrew had escaped. Sirius had had to fly away on a hippogriff because there was no other option. He was still a fugitive. Harry didn't know where he was. He'd had one letter, early in the summer, from a warm location based on the bird that delivered it, brief and careful, Sirius keeping himself nonspecific for safety. Will you be able to get him a trial? Harry asked. He stopped. He'd been about to say without Dumbledore blocking it, but that felt strange to say out loud. That, McGonagall said, is what Amelia Bones is for. Amelia Bones arrived that afternoon. Harry was upstairs, nominally unpacking, actually sitting on the bed in the room McGonagall had given him looking at the walls, when he heard the fire in the kitchen downstairs flare up and the sound of voices. He unpacked a few more things, then went down. Bones was a square, solid woman in her 50s with a monocle and the bearing of someone who had spent decades being correct and didn't feel the need to be entertaining about it. She had a leather briefcase that she placed on the kitchen table and opened immediately, and she and McGonagall were already in the middle of something when Harry appeared in the doorway. They both looked at him. Harry Potter, Bones said. Not as a greeting, exactly. As a verification. Yes, he said. Amelia Bones. I run the DMLE. She looked at him with the same comprehensive quality McGonagall had, the look of people who were used to reading situations quickly and didn't waste the skill. You look like your father. Less like him than I expected, but the eyes are his mother's anyway. She returned to her briefcase. Come in and sit down. This concerns you. He sat down. Ptolemy reappeared at his ankle. I've reviewed the welfare file, Bones said to McGonagall, and the medical documentation Pomfrey compiled. It's enough for a guardianship review, comfortably. It would be enough for a Muggle criminal prosecution, for that matter, which is interesting and which I may pursue separately, but that's a secondary matter. She pulled several documents out. The Black petition is more complicated. I've looked at the original arrest documentation. Or rather, she said, setting the documents down with a certain precise force, the complete absence of original arrest documentation. There's nothing. McGonagall said. Oh, there's plenty. There's a record of his arrest. There's a record of his detention. There's a note in Crouch's hand, Bartemius Crouch Sr., Minister for Magical Law Enforcement at the time, directing that Black be sent directly to Azkaban pending trial. She looked up. There is no record of the trial ever being scheduled, or having occurred, or having been waived. He was simply, filed. The word filed sat in the room like something cold. 12 years, McGonagall said, very quietly. 12 years, Bones confirmed. She looked at Harry. Do you understand what that means, legally? He never had due process, Harry said. So any sentence he's serving isn't legal. Bones looked at him for a moment. Then, to McGonagall, she said, he's quick. He was raised to be observant, McGonagall said, and the way she said it made Harry look at her, but she was already looking at Bones. The problem, Bones said, is that getting a trial scheduled means getting it past the Wisingamot Scheduling Committee, which is chaired by Tiberius Ogden, who has been in Dumbledore's pocket since 1979. She laced her fingers together on the table. Dumbledore will move to block the scheduling. He has the political architecture to do it. What I need is someone with equal and opposite political architecture to counter him. Which you're working on, McGonagall said. Which I'm working on. I've had 3 very interesting conversations this week with people who would normally never tell me anything, and they're all telling me the same thing: there is appetite for this. Dumbledore has been the most powerful man in Wizarding Britain for 40 years, and a number of people in positions of authority have been waiting, very quietly, for an occasion to assert some independence. Bones allowed herself a small, sharp smile. I intend to give them an occasion. Harry listened to this and thought about the machinery of it, the political architecture of it, the way that power worked in ways he'd mostly never had to think about because he'd always been on the side of it where thinking didn't matter because you didn't have any. It was interesting in a way that was also slightly cold, like watching a chess game where you were a piece. What do you need from me? He said. Both women looked at him. Right now? Nothing, Bones said. Your testimony will come later, at the hearing. For now you keep yourself here, you stay out of the press, and you will appear in the press. I promise you that, the moment this becomes public knowledge, which will be shortly, and you let us do the foundational work. All right, he said. You're taking this very calmly, Bones observed, not critically. Just noting it. He thought about how to answer that. I've been waiting for something to change since I was about 8 years old, he said. I've gotten pretty good at waiting. When it starts changing, I'll deal with it. He paused. I just want Sirius to get his trial. Something shifted in Bones's expression. Not softening, exactly, she wasn't a woman who softened easily, which was probably how you survived 30 years in wizarding law enforcement, but something humanized. So do I, she said. The days settled into a shape. McGonagall's house was the kind of house that had its own rhythms and was perfectly prepared to absorb another person's rhythms into them without conflict. Breakfast at 8, whether or not either of them was particularly hungry. She worked at the kitchen table in the mornings, correspondence and legal documents and what appeared to be a comprehensive dismantling of Dumbledore's guardianship arrangements from approximately 9 different angles simultaneously. He had the upstairs sitting room to himself, which had good light and 4 floor-to-ceiling shelves of books and an atmosphere of a space that had been thought in extensively, the best kind of room. He read. He flew, once, in the early mornings before Edinburgh woke up properly, low over the crescent, which was probably not entirely legal and which McGonagall's expression when she observed this from the front step suggested she knew about and had decided not to address yet. They talked at dinner. She asked him about classes, what he liked, what he found difficult, and he answered with more honesty than he usually did because the particular quality of her attention made it difficult to give the perfunctory answers he was used to giving. She didn't make him feel like a problem to be managed or a symbol to be polished. She listened the way someone does when they're interested in the answer, and it was strange and slightly disorienting and he was slowly getting used to it. Why Transfiguration? He asked her one evening. It was after dinner, the remains of it still on the table, and she had a glass of wine and he had tea and Ptolemy was occupying exactly the center of the table in defiance of all social convention. Because it's honest, she said. You cannot bluff Transfiguration. Either the thing changes or it doesn't. Either you understood the theory or you didn't. It tells you the truth immediately. She looked at him. Why do you ask? You seem like someone who could have done anything, he said. She considered this. I could have gone into magical law, she said. Dumbledore actually asked me to consider joining the order rather than teaching, in the early days of the First War. She paused. I chose teaching because it seemed to me that the most important thing you could do for the world was not to go and fight in it but to produce people who were better equipped to handle it than the generation before them. She was quiet for a moment. I stand by that. He thought about what it meant that she'd chosen this for 30 years and was now here, at her kitchen table, doing what was beginning to look very much like war. You gave up a lot, he said. Resigning. She looked at him sharply, and then she looked at the table, and then she said, very precisely, no. I gave up a version of myself that was complicit in something I should not have been complicit in. That is not a loss. He didn't say anything. He was getting better at knowing when not to. The letter from Dumbledore arrived on a Wednesday, 8 days after they arrived. It was addressed to McGonagall and carried by one of the Hogwarts owls that Harry recognized, an elderly tawny called Archimedes who had been delivering school posts since what felt like before time began. He arrived with the letter in the early morning and the unmistakable air of an owl who had been asked to do something politically significant and had no opinion about it. McGonagall read the letter at the kitchen table. Her face was the face of a very controlled person reading something they had expected but still found objectionable. She folded it. She set it down. He's requesting a meeting, she said. He would like to discuss, and I quote, a resolution that serves everyone's best interests, most particularly Harry's. Harry spread butter on his toast. Are you going to meet with him? No, she said. He nodded. He had expected this. She picked up her quill. She wrote a response in about 45 seconds, he could see from the angle that it was very short, and sent Archimedes back with it. What did you say? He asked. She looked at him. The morning light caught her spectacles and turned them briefly opaque. I said that I was satisfied that my solicitor was adequately representing my interests, and that any further communication could be directed through him. She sipped her tea. And that if he tried to remove you from this house by any magical or non-magical means, I would ensure that the documentation Madame Pomfrey compiled was in the possession of every major wizarding publication in Britain within the hour. Harry put down his toast. That's, he started. Direct, she said. Yes. A pause. Are you all right with that? It's your information. I should have told you I intended to say that. He thought about his medical file being in the Daily Prophet and his stomach did something uncomfortable. Then he thought about Dumbledore having unlimited access to political machinery and the information being the primary thing that checked it, and he thought about Sirius in a warm location somewhere writing short careful letters. Yes, he said. It's fine. He won't call the bluff, she said. Not yet. He's too politically sophisticated to let that documentation go public without controlling the narrative first. But he'll know we'll use it, and that limits what he can do through back channels. She returned to her correspondence. Eat your toast. He ate his toast. That afternoon, Remus Lupin arrived. He appeared in the fireplace looking like he'd had several more bad nights since Harry had last seen him, which was saying something because Remus Lupin's good nights were other people's bad ones. He had a battered bag over one shoulder and the expression of someone who had made a decision and was committed to it and also wasn't entirely sure it had been the right one. Harry was in the kitchen when he came through. They looked at each other. Hi, Harry said. Harry. Lupin's voice had that quality it sometimes did, like someone speaking carefully around something fragile. He looked at Harry with the same comprehensive look everyone seemed to use on him, and then he crossed the kitchen and did something Harry didn't expect. He sat down at the table, put his bag down, and said, I'm sorry. I knew something was wrong and I didn't push hard enough and I'm sorry. Harry looked at him. He thought about being angry. He had some anger available. There was a general pool of it that various people probably deserved portions of, Lupin included. The list was long, but what he actually felt, sitting across from Remus Lupin, who looked like he hadn't slept in a week and had clearly come here to do something about it rather than to be forgiven, was not anger. "Are you going to help?" he asked. "Yes," Lupin said. "Then okay," Harry said. "That's enough." Lupin looked at him with something that was partially gratitude and partially something else, something quieter and more complicated that Harry didn't have the vocabulary for, but that felt like it might be about his father. McGonagall came in from the hallway with 3 folders under her arm and saw Lupin and said, "Good. You can start on the ward documentation tonight, without breaking stride." "I already have 12 pages, Lupin said. "Make it 20, she said. She put the folders on the table. The 3 of them sat around it in the afternoon light, the city going about its business outside, Ptolemy asleep in the chair, and they worked. Harry didn't have a task yet. There were limits to what a 13-year-old could contribute to a legal dismantling of a chief warlock's political influence, and he was realistic about this, but he sat with them and he read what they put in front of him and he asked questions and they answered, and he thought that this was what it might feel like to be part of something that was being done on your behalf by people who actually meant it. He thought about Privet Drive. About the smallest bedroom. About the bare mattress he'd left. He thought about Friday, and the gate, and how he hadn't looked back. He reached across the table, quietly, and pulled one of Lupin's parchments toward him. He read the ward theory. He found 3 passages he didn't understand and circled them. He slid it back. Lupin looked at the circles, then at him. "Ask," Harry said. Lupin explained. Harry listened. At the end he asked 2 more questions. Lupin answered them. McGonagall, without looking up, said, "He's right, Remus, the 3rd passage contradicts the 1st. Fix it." "I know," Lupin said, and fixed it. Outside, Edinburgh moved through its afternoon. Inside the tall stone townhouse, something was being built, not quickly, not dramatically, but with the particular solidity of things made by people who understood why they were making them. Harry picked up another parchment. He started reading. Chapter 3, Old Debts and Older Magic. The owl from Sirius arrived on a Thursday morning, 2 weeks into Harry's residence in Edinburgh, and it was not the careful, abbreviated kind of letter he'd been sending all summer. It was 3 pages. Harry read it at the kitchen table before McGonagall came down, which was early. She was an early riser, but Harry was earlier, one of those Privet Drive habits he hadn't managed to shake yet. The owl was a large, unfamiliar brown one, not Sirius's usual choice of bird, which meant he'd borrowed it from somewhere, which meant he'd been somewhere people had owls. Harry filed this away without drawing conclusions yet and read. The first page was what he expected, checking in, asking if Harry was all right, careful phrasing that touched the edges of things without pressing on them directly. Sirius had always written like that, like a man who knew he was being watched and had learned to communicate in spaces between sentences. But the second page changed. "I've heard things," Sirius wrote. "I have contacts who still talk to me, people who remember what I was before and haven't decided what I am now. They're telling me something is moving. Something in the ministry. Someone filed a petition, Harry, and it has my name on it, and I can't tell yet whether to feel hope or fear about that because I've felt hope before and I know what Azkaban does to hope. Tell me it's real. Tell me someone who knows what they're doing is behind it. Tell me it's not some well-meaning amateur who'll get it thrown out in committee before it even reaches the floor. And tell me you're safe. I know you're not at Privet Drive." The address changed. "Tell me what's happening." Harry sat with the letter for a moment. Then he pulled out parchment. He wrote, "It's McGonagall. She's not an amateur. She has Amelia Bones. It's real." Then he added, "I'm safe. I'm in Edinburgh. Come if you can." He stared at that last line for a second. Then he sent it before he could think about it more. McGonagall came downstairs at 7:15 and found him reading the rest of Sirius's letter, and she looked at the brown owl, which had settled on the windowsill with proprietary confidence, and said, "That's not a school owl." "No," Harry said. "It's Sirius's." He's heard about the petition. He handed her the letter. She read it. He watched her face and saw the thing that happened in it when she read the line about hope and Azkaban, the tightening, the brief recession behind composure. How much does he know? She asked. Just that someone filed in his name. Not details. She handed the letter back and went to put the kettle on. She was quiet for a moment, her back to him, doing the small domestic actions of someone who was thinking about something else. Then she said, I should have pushed for this in 1981. I should have pushed for it before Crouch sent him to Azkaban. I knew something about that arrest felt wrong. She didn't make it sound like self-pity. She said it the way she said things she needed to be on record about, cleanly and without decoration. I said nothing. You're doing it now, Harry said. She turned around and looked at him. There it was again, that revision of assessment. Eat breakfast, she said. Lupin was working from the house now most days, his battered bag having expanded alarmingly to contain what appeared to be an entire academic library on ancient wizarding ward theory. He occupied one end of the kitchen table with the focused disorganization of a researcher who knew exactly where everything was despite appearances to the contrary. He and McGonagall worked in the comfortable silence of people who didn't need to narrate their process to each other, which Harry found he liked. It was a productive quiet, the kind that had content. This morning Lupin was deep in a text called Sacrificial Magics of the Pre-Unification Period, a book with a spine so cracked it was essentially held together by habit, and he looked up when Harry came back inside from sending his response to Sirius with an expression that suggested he'd been waiting for the right moment to say something. I've finished the ward analysis, he said. McGonagall's read it, but you should too. There's a section it's relevant to you specifically, and I think you should hear it from me rather than from a legal document. Harry sat down. Okay. Lupin closed the old book and laced his fingers together on the table. He had the particular careful quality of someone who had thought a lot about how to phrase something and still wasn't certain he'd got it right. The blood wards, he said. The ones Dumbledore cited as the reason you needed to stay at Privet Drive. I've been through the original theory, the foundational spells, Lily's specific sacrifice and how the magic took. He paused. Dumbledore's argument is that the wards are anchored to the blood relative's home. That as long as Petunia Dursley has a roof over her head and Harry Potter can call it home, the wards hold. The implication being that changing Harry's residence would dissolve the protection. And that's wrong. Harry said. It's not entirely wrong, Lupin said carefully. The blood connection is real. The anchor to Petunia is real. But the second condition, what constitutes home for Harry, is where his argument is weakest, and where I think he knows it's weakest. He opened a different book, newer, cleaner. Ancient magic of this type is responsive to emotional reality, not legal designation. The home component of the ward isn't the address. It's the experience of safety. The sense of being somewhere that is genuinely, meaningfully home. He looked at Harry steadily. Which means the wards haven't been operating at full strength in years. Possibly ever. Harry stared at him. Because it was never actually home, Harry said. Because it was never actually home, Lupin said, and his voice did the thing it did sometimes, the fracture along a particular frequency. Which means the protection Dumbledore said required you to stay there, required you to endure what you endured, was compromised by those very conditions. You were suffering to maintain something that the suffering itself was undermining. The kitchen was quiet. Outside, a cart went by on the cobbles. Ptolemy was watching Lupin from the chair with what appeared to be professional interest. Harry thought about this. He thought about it very carefully because it deserved to be thought about carefully, the enormous, specific irony of it, the full-circle stupidity of it. Dumbledore had left him in a place that made him miserable in order to power wards that required him to feel at home, which the misery prevented, so the wards were weak anyway. Does this help the legal case? He said. Enormously, Lupin said. It removes Dumbledore's primary justification for the placement entirely. He can't argue magical necessity if the magical mechanism wasn't functioning as intended. He pushed the book toward Harry. The relevant section is page 247. I've bookmarked it. Harry opened it. He read it. His mind moved through the theory the way it moved through a Quidditch problem, finding the angles, testing the structure, looking for the places it held and the places it didn't. He had questions. He asked them. Lupin answered them with the patient thoroughness of a good teacher, which was what he was, Harry thought. Whatever else he was or wasn't, he was a genuinely good teacher. They were still at it when McGonagall came in from her study, looked at the open books, and said, "Did you show him page 247? Just now," Lupin said. She looked at Harry. The wards were broken anyway, Harry said. More or less. Because of what it was like there. Correct. She sat down and opened her own folder. Which I intend to make very plain to the Wisengamot. She looked at the page for a moment. It also means that what Dumbledore did wasn't merely ethically compromised. It was strategically incompetent. He sacrificed a child's welfare for a protection that wasn't working, and then maintained the situation for 12 years because admitting it would have required admitting the error. She turned a page. That argument will land well with people who've always thought the greater good calculus was too conveniently Dumbledore's own. The people Bones is cultivating, Harry said. She looked up at him again. You've been listening, she said. Always, he said. The first sign that Dumbledore was moving came from Flitwick. He arrived by Flo on a Friday afternoon, a Flo connection McGonagall had kept open at his specific request, which told Harry something about how she thought about the people she'd worked with, categorically, not sentimentally. Flitwick was small and sharp and obviously unhappy, and he sat at the kitchen table with his tea cupped in both hands and delivered his news with the brisk efficiency of a man who decided to do something and wanted it over. He's called a meeting of the full staff, Flitwick said. Next Tuesday. All heads of house specifically, mandatory attendance. He's framing it as a discussion about the summer curriculum review, but, a pause, and something passed across his face that was not quite guilt and not quite admiration. He's been in private conversation with 3 members of the Hogwarts Board of Governors this week. McGonagall set down her quill. About my resignation? About the position of head of Gryffindor House, Flitwick said. And about whether your departure, as he's phrasing it, was entirely voluntary. He's laying the groundwork to characterize what you did as, I believe the word he used with Tiberius Hardwick was impulsive. He would, McGonagall said. He's also suggesting, very gently, to the right people, that there are concerns about your judgment under stress. Flitwick said this with the pained expression of a man delivering a message he found distasteful. He's not saying it directly. He's simply, seeding the idea. That perhaps recent events have left you not entirely yourself. The room was quiet. Harry watched McGonagall. She sat back in her chair. Her expression was perfectly composed. She looked, for a moment, at a fixed middle distance, and Harry had the impression she was running through something in her head, a decision tree, the particular process she used when she was being meticulous about not making the wrong move. He wants me to be emotional about it, she said finally. He wants me to respond, to appear reactive, to make the case for him that I'm not steady. She looked at Flitwick. What's the board's response? Mixed, Flitwick said. Hardwick is sympathetic to Dumbledore. Marchbanks, he paused, and something changed in his expression, something that might have been carefully suppressed delight. Griselda Marchbanks told Dumbledore, and I have this secondhand from a reliable source, that she found it extraordinary he thought Harry Potter's welfare file constituted an impulsive response. McGonagall's mouth did one thing, briefly, that Harry had never seen it do. It almost smiled. That's Griselda, she said. She's on your side, Flitwick said. Actively. She called me herself. He looked at Harry. She sends her regards, by the way. Says she examined your OWLs, pre-examined them. Says she's looking forward to seeing what you do with them. He shook his head slightly. You have friends in strange places, Mr. Potter. So I'm learning, Harry said. Flitwick stayed for another hour, during which he and McGonagall went through the Board of Governors with methodical thoroughness, assessing each member's likely position, who could be moved, who couldn't, where the pressure points were. Harry listened. He asked 2 questions that made Flitwick look at him sideways in the way people were increasingly doing, the recalibrating look. After Flitwick left, McGonagall stood at the window for a moment. "He's going to try to make this about me," she said. "My state of mind, my professionalism. It takes the focus off the file." "Will it work?" Harry asked. "It will work on some people," she said. "It always does. But Amelia Bones is not some people." She turned from the window. "And neither, I think, is Griselda Marchbanks." The letter from Sirius came back 3 days later. Same brown owl, same borrowed bird, but this time the letter was brief and the handwriting was different, less controlled, the letters leaning into each other in a way that suggested urgency or emotion or both. Edinburgh. McGonagall's house. "I know it. I'll be there on Monday. Don't tell anyone." Harry read this and thought about the phrase "don't tell anyone" and looked up at McGonagall across the breakfast table. "Sirius is coming Monday," he said. She looked up from the document she was reading. "Don't tell anyone," she said, apparently reading this in his expression. "He said don't tell anyone," Harry confirmed. "He said it to you," she said. "I live here." She returned to her document. "I'll make the spare room suitable." Harry thought about this distinction for a moment. He said it to you, I live here, and found it, for reasons he couldn't entirely articulate, reassuring. Monday came with rain, genuine Scottish rain that came sideways off the hills and made the city grey and close and atmospheric in the way that Scottish cities do rain better than anywhere else. Harry had been at the window since mid-morning, not watching for Sirius exactly, more just looking at the street in the way you look at something when you're thinking about something else and need your eyes to be occupied. He appeared at 2 o'clock. He didn't come to the door. He appeared in the back garden. Harry heard the quiet, concentrated crack of a disapparition arrival in the small walled garden behind the house, and he was down the kitchen stairs and opening the back door before he'd consciously decided to move. Sirius Black was thinner than Harry remembered. He'd been thin in the Shrieking Shack, the Azkaban thin of someone who'd lived on the minimum required to stay alive, but he'd been recovering at the end of term. Harry had thought, he'd looked better. Now he was thin differently, not starved but worn, the thinness of someone who'd been moving fast for a long time and not resting. He had a pack on his back and a traveling cloak that had been dried by magic but still had the smell of genuine weather in it. He was not dressed like a fugitive who was trying to pass unnoticed. He was dressed like a man who had decided that wasn't the strategy anymore. He looked at Harry and Harry looked at him. 12 years was a long time. Harry had known Sirius for less than a year in any meaningful sense, which was barely any time at all, and also it was something. It was Sirius in the Shrieking Shack saying I want to be a family, Sirius's letter at the beginning of the summer asking if he was all right, Sirius who was his godfather, the only living person who had been in the room when his parents named him. "Harry," Sirius said. His voice was rough from travel or emotion or both. "Hi," Harry said. "You look terrible." Sirius laughed, unexpected, a real laugh. "You look better than I expected," he said. "Significantly better than," he stopped. "Better than the file says I should?" Harry said. Something moved in Sirius's face. "Come inside," Harry said. McGonagall made an enormous pot of something. Sirius followed him in. He stepped through the kitchen door and stopped, taking in the room, the table covered in parchment and books, the warmth, the smell of food, and McGonagall standing on the other side of the table with her arms folded and an expression that was its own complete communication. They looked at each other for a long moment, Sirius and McGonagall, the way two people look at each other when they have a complicated history and neither of them is inclined to be sentimental about it. "Professor," Sirius said. "Mr. Black," she said. "You'd better sit down. You look like you've been walking since Tuesday." "Thursday, actually," he said. He sat down. She put a bowl in front of him. He looked at it, and then at her, and something in the sheer domesticity of the gesture, the bowl, the table, the soup, seemed to take him somewhere he hadn't expected to go, some inner room, because he was quiet for a second. "Thank you," he said. His voice was lower. "Eat," she said. He ate. Harry sat across from him and Ptolemy appeared on the chair between them and surveyed Sirius with the exhaustive curiosity of a cat encountering something that smelled interesting. "I've read your file," McGonagall said, sitting down with her own tea. She had a folder in front of her, not Harry's, a different one. Thinner. Just as damning for that. The arrest record. Or rather, the records that should exist and don't. Sirius looked up from the bowl. "There's no trial documentation," she said. "Anywhere. Bones has been through the entire DMLE archive. Crouch sent you to Azkaban on his own authority." "I know," Sirius said quietly. "Did you know at the time?" "I knew I wasn't getting a trial," he said. "I assumed there was a process I wasn't being told about." "I was," he paused, and the pause was heavy with things he wasn't going to say, or couldn't quite say, things that probably had to do with what it felt like to be 21 years old and arrested 3 hours after you'd found your best friends dead and their child in the rubble. "I wasn't in a condition to make legal arguments." "And then Azkaban makes you not in a condition for anything." "You've been in a condition for a great deal, evidently," McGonagall said. It was not unkind. 3 months as a fugitive. "I had to see Harry was safe," he said. "After I escaped. I had to see Peter was," he stopped again. "I had to know." "Pettigrew is still at large," McGonagall said. "I know." Something hardened in Sirius's face. "That's the thing. That's the piece that matters. Because I can get a trial, I can argue wrongful imprisonment, but without Pettigrew I'm arguing my own innocence with no witness who can confirm it except," he looked at Harry. "Except me," Harry said. "You were there. In the shack. You heard him." "I heard him," Harry confirmed. "He confessed. In front of me and Ron and Hermione and Lupin." He looked at McGonagall. "Lupin was there." "Remus has already given a witness statement," McGonagall said. "Sworn and sealed. It's in Bones's possession." Sirius stared at her. "You've been busy," he said. "I've been irritated," she said, and the precision of it, the dry understatement of it, made Sirius laugh again, the same real laugh, and Harry thought, there it is. The man his father had known. The man who was Padfoot. The man who was getting further from Azkaban with every hour, sitting at a kitchen table in Edinburgh eating soup. "The problem remains Pettigrew," McGonagall said. "Without him in custody, the Wisengamot can still argue reasonable doubt. Lupin's testimony and Harry's are strong, but they're both compromised, Lupin by his condition, Harry by his age and his relationship to you. We need either Pettigrew or a Veritaserum session for you, and that requires getting you into custody voluntarily first." Sirius was quiet. "Voluntary custody. To appear for trial," she said. "Yes. I won't pretend it isn't a risk. If the scheduling goes wrong, if Dumbledore manages to stall it, he won't," Sirius said. He looked at Harry. "He won't be able to, will he? If McGonagall and Bones are running this." "Bones is running it," Harry said. "McGonagall is the engine." McGonagall looked at him with an expression he was becoming familiar with, the one that meant she was filing something away. "There's still the matter of the hearing date," she said. "Bones has it in committee. She needs 2 more votes on the scheduling board to override Ogden's block. She has 4 names she's working." She looked at Sirius. "If you turn yourself in before the date is confirmed, we lose the leverage of your freedom. If you wait too long, it becomes a problem in itself." She folded her hands. "I'm telling you this because it's your decision. Not mine. Not Bones's. Yours." Sirius sat back in his chair. He looked older than his age, still, and he probably always would, but there was something else in his face now, something that hadn't been there in the photographs Harry had seen of him as a young man before Azkaban. Wait, yes. But also the specific clarity of a person who had been stripped of everything and had to identify from scratch what mattered. The votes, he said. Who are the 4 names? McGonagall slid a piece of parchment across the table. He read it. Marchbanks, I understand. The other 3, he looked up. You've been working on this for 2 weeks. I've been working on this since the night of the staff meeting, she said. He stared at her. You resigned at the staff meeting, he said slowly. Correct. So between resigning and the end of that same evening you had written to Bones, contacted a family law solicitor, and begun work on my petition. A pause. How long did the file take to read? 40 minutes, she said. Sirius looked at Harry. Something in his expression was complicated. She didn't even know you, Harry said. Not as an accusation. As a fact, and also as a thing he was still sitting with. Oh, I knew him, McGonagall said. Her voice was level but there was something underneath it. I've known Harry since he was an hour old. I sat outside his parents' house in Surrey for a day, watching, before Albus placed him there. I knew him as a student for 3 years. I failed to know him the right way, which is entirely different. The rain came harder against the windows. Ptolemy had moved from the chair to Sirius's lap without invitation, which was unprecedented enough that Harry raised his eyebrows. He can tell character, McGonagall said, without looking at the cat. Inconveniently accurate. Good cat, Sirius said, with feeling, and put his hand on Ptolemy's back. Lupin arrived that evening and stopped dead in the kitchen doorway when he saw Sirius. There was a moment, just a moment, about 3 seconds long, where both of them were simply looking at each other and the kitchen existed in a bubble of everything that sat between them, which was James and Lily and Peter and 12 years and the shrieking shack and all of it, compressed into 3 seconds. Then Sirius said, Moony. And Lupin crossed the kitchen and grabbed him, hard, both arms, and neither of them said anything for a while. Harry watched and thought about his parents, who would have been in this kitchen too, in a different world. The thought was familiar, he'd had it often enough that he knew its shape, but it had a different quality here, less like a ghost and more like an absence with a particular texture, something you could put your hand to. He got up quietly and refilled the kettle. When Lupin and Sirius finally separated, Lupin's eyes were wet and he made no attempt to hide this. He sat down. He looked at Sirius with the thoroughness of someone cataloging damage. You look like hell, he said. So I've been told, Sirius said, looking at Harry. I have the ward analysis, Lupin said, transitioning with the abruptness of a man who needed to move before he stopped. Finished. All 22 pages. He pulled it from his bag. The core argument holds. The wards were operating at reduced efficacy due to environmental conditions that Dumbledore created and maintained. You're saying he undermined his own protection scheme, Sirius said. I'm saying his protection scheme undermined itself, Lupin said. Which is worse, actually. He didn't even have to act negligently on the day. He built the negligence into the structure and then maintained it for 12 years because the admission that it wasn't working would have required admitting what he'd done. Sirius read the ward analysis. He read quickly, like Harry, which was interesting. Harry had always supposed he'd got the habit from somewhere, and apparently the Marauders as a group were fast readers. He read it twice. He set it down. This is good, he said to Lupin. This is very good. Moony, this is, he stopped. Who else has seen this? Bones. McGonagall. Harry. Harry's read this? I asked him to, Lupin said. Sirius looked at Harry with an expression that Harry found vaguely exasperating, the look that people kept giving him that said you're more than I expected, as though this were surprising. I read, Harry said, mildly. You read academic magical theory for fun, Sirius said. I read it because I wanted to understand what's happening, Harry said. There's a difference. He circled the inconsistencies on the first pass, Lupin said. I'd already fixed 2 of them before I noticed he'd marked them. Sirius looked at him for a long moment. Something was happening in his face, and Harry couldn't read all of it, but some of it he could read, and it had to do with James, with what James would have made of his son sitting at a kitchen table in Edinburgh annotating academic arguments about ancient ward theory in his own defense. He'd have been so smug, Sirius said, half to himself. Bloody insufferably smug. His son, reading theoretical magic before his 3rd year OWLs. He'd have cried, Lupin said quietly. He would have absolutely cried, Sirius confirmed. And then denied it. He looked at Harry. You look like him. The eyes are different, but he gestured at Harry's face, the general quality of it. The way you're sitting right now. He used to sit like that when he was thinking. Harry didn't know what to do with this, which was how he usually received information about his parents, gratefully, clumsily, not quite able to hold it the right way. McGonagall said something, he said. She said she sat outside my parents' house for a day before Dumbledore placed me there. Lupin looked at McGonagall, who was across the room and had been working, but who looked up now. I did, she said. You didn't want him to place me there, Harry said. No, she said. But you didn't, no, she said again. And then, quietly, I didn't. She looked at him, and the usual precision of her face did something it rarely did, opened slightly, let something out. I have thought about that day, Harry, every day for the last 2 weeks. I had my reservations, I expressed them, Dumbledore explained himself, and she stopped. I deferred. The way I had always deferred. Because he was Albus Dumbledore, and the world had told me for long enough that this was the correct response. She straightened. I am not going to make a different choice now. I made it when I stood up at that table and put my resignation on the floor in front of him. There's nothing I can do about that day in October of 1981 except make everything I do from now count more. The room was quiet. Sirius was looking at her with an expression Harry had not seen on his face before. It was not the wariness he'd had when he arrived. It was not the comfortable affection he'd used with Lupin. It was something more considered, something earned. I need to make a decision, Sirius said. He looked around the table. About turning myself in. You said it was my decision, Professor. It is, she said. I'll do it, he said. When Bones has the votes for the date. Not before. But when she has them. He looked at Harry. I'm not running anymore. I've been running since I escaped, and it's, a pause, and something that had nothing to do with cowardice moved in his face, it's not what I want. I want this done. I want a trial and a verdict, and he stopped again. I want to stand in a room and have the truth said out loud. In a place where people have to hear it. Then that's what will get you, McGonagall said. Her voice was the most certain Harry had ever heard it, which was saying something. Between Bones and this ward analysis and your testimony and Harry's, we will get you a room, Sirius, and the truth will be said in it. I promise you that. Sirius looked at her for a moment. His jaw worked once. You couldn't have said that to me 12 years ago, he said. No, she said. I couldn't. I wasn't the person who would have meant it. A pause. I mean it now. He nodded. He looked at the table and then at Harry. You all right? He asked Harry, quietly, while Lupin and McGonagall were talking about documentation. Harry thought about it genuinely, the way he'd been trying to think about things more genuinely since Edinburgh. Getting there, he said. Yeah, Sirius said. Me too. They sat at the kitchen table in the Edinburgh rain, the 4 of them, and the documents spread between them were the shape of a legal argument but also the shape of something else, something you couldn't put in a Wisengamot filing but that was present in the room as clearly as anything else, the reckoning. Long ode. Finally beginning. Outside, the city went dark. Inside, the lights stayed on. They worked late into the night. The message from Bones came the next morning before 7, urgent, by Ministry Owl. I have the votes. The hearing date is confirmed. 3 weeks. Tell Black. McGonagall read it. She walked to the doorway of the sitting room where Sirius had slept on the settee. He'd refused the spare room, said he'd slept on worse than sofas for 12 years and he wasn't wrong, and she said, without preamble, 3 weeks. Sirius sat up. He was awake. She suspected he'd slept the way people slept who'd spent years in Azkaban, lightly, just under the surface. He looked at her. 3 weeks, he said. The hearing date is confirmed, she said. Bones has the votes. Ogden's block failed. She let this land. I'll need you back here in 2 weeks and 3 days. Before then, she paused, considering him, go wherever you need to go. Do what you need to do. But come back. He stood up. He was in the same clothes, slightly rumpled, and he ran a hand through his hair in a gesture that was apparently a Black family expression of composure because Harry had seen Harry do it in his sleep. 2 weeks and 3 days, he said. Yes. He looked toward the stairs, where Harry was presumably still asleep. Will you tell him? When he's up. Tell him. Sirius stopped. Something moved in his face. Just tell him I'll be back. I will, she said. He picked up his pack. He went to the back door. He looked back once, at the kitchen, at the table with its stacks of parchment and its strategic significance, at Ptolemy who was watching from the windowsill with that cats never pretend they're not watching quality. Professor McGonagall, he said. Mr. Black. Thank you, he said. For all of it. Don't thank me, she said. Win. He smiled. It was the smile Harry had seen in photographs, the proper one, the one that was entirely Sirius Black before everything happened to him, the one that said I know exactly how good this is going to be. He opened the door. He stepped out into the thin morning light. He was gone. McGonagall stood in the kitchen and listened to the city waking up and thought about 3 weeks, what 3 weeks meant, what had to happen in them. She put the kettle on. She sat down at the table with her folder. She started to work. Chapter 4, The Weight of Knowing. The Daily Prophet ran the story on a Tuesday. Harry found out because Lupin came downstairs at 7:30 holding the paper with the expression of a man who had been expecting a detonation and had just heard the fuse run out. He set it on the kitchen table without a word. McGonagall was already up, already reading the letter that had arrived simultaneously, Bones, by Ministry Owl, her handwriting more compressed than usual, which Harry had learned meant she was moving fast. He looked at the paper. The headline was not subtle. Dumbledore's Boy, The Truth About Harry Potter's Home Life, Ministry Source Reveals Welfare Concerns at Privet Drive. Below it, a photograph of Harry from his first year, the one that had been taken for the school records, looking 11 and slightly startled. Beside it, a photograph of number 4, Privet Drive, gray and ordinary and somehow more damning for how ordinary it looked. He read the article. It was sourced anonymously, a ministry official with direct knowledge of the case, and it was careful, precise, legally formatted, clearly written by someone who understood exactly how much they could say and how to say it for maximum impact. It mentioned the welfare file. It mentioned the pattern of documented malnourishment across 3 years. It did not use the word abuse directly, but it used every word around it with the precision of someone pointing at a thing without touching it. It mentioned Dumbledore's name 7 times. Harry put the paper down. Bones, he said. Bones, McGonagall confirmed, not looking up from her letter. She told us she'd control the narrative, he said. She told us the story was going to get out, McGonagall said. This is her version going out first. She turned a page. The alternative was Dumbledore's version, which would have emphasized his noble intentions and Harry's dramatic reaction and the tragic necessity of certain difficult choices. She said tragic necessity the way she said most things she found contemptible, which was with perfect grammatical accuracy and a temperature that could frost glass. Lupin was still standing at the table, reading the article again with his hands very still. "It's going to be enormous," he said quietly. "Harry, people are going to," he stopped. "The public reaction will be, I know," Harry said. "You might want to stay inside today," Lupin said. "I'm not hiding," Harry said. Lupin looked at him. Then he looked at McGonagall, who had not looked up, and she said, still not looking up, "He's not hiding, Remus." "I'm not suggesting, you were about to suggest he keep a low profile until the fuss dies down," McGonagall said. "Which is the kind of suggestion that sounds prudent but actually cedes the ground to Dumbledore's counter-narrative, which will be along shortly. Harry being visible and clearly well and clearly acting of his own agency is more useful than Harry being invisible." She finally looked up. "Harry, do you have any objection to speaking to the press at some point this week?" "Not if it helps," he said. "It helps considerably. I'll tell Bones." She returned to her letter. "Today, you can go out. Don't engage with anyone who approaches you unless you feel like it, and if you feel like it, be exactly yourself, which is more effective than any prepared statement." Harry looked at her. "Be exactly yourself," he repeated. "You're a 13-year-old boy who read his own welfare file and is calmly engaged in the legal process of fixing what was wrong with his care," she said. "That is what you are. Be it." He considered this. He nodded. He ate his breakfast. The owls started arriving at 8. By mid-morning there were 43 letters on the kitchen table, which Lupin was sorting with methodical anxiety into categories: press requests, letters from members of the public, official correspondence, and what he called miscellaneous, which appeared to be a category for letters that were hard to classify because they were too emotionally raw to be official and too specific to be general. "This one's from a woman who says she was in the same situation as Harry and wants to know if the same legal mechanism applies to Muggle circumstances," Lupin said. "This one is from a Hogwarts parent who wants to know why the school's pastoral documentation process hasn't been updated since 1953, which is," he paused, "an extremely good question actually." He put it aside. "This one is from Cornelius Fudge, which I'm not opening." "Give it to me," McGonagall said. She opened it. She read it. She set it face down without visible emotion. "What does it say?" Harry asked. "He's concerned," she said. "He would like to know if a meeting might be arranged. He believes there are perspectives on the situation that might benefit from ministerial context." She picked up her quill. "He means he wants to talk me out of it before it gets worse for Dumbledore, who is the cornerstone of his political stability." She wrote a response in 30 seconds. "I've told him I'm delighted to meet with him the week after the hearing." Harry watched her. "Not before. Before, he tries to insert himself into the process. After, he has to accommodate the results." She sealed the letter. "Fudge is not a bad man. He's a frightened one, which is arguably more dangerous, but his fear can be directed if you time it correctly. After the hearing, his primary fear will be being on the wrong side of public opinion, and the right side of public opinion will be the side we're on." She looked at Harry. "This is how institutional change happens. Not through confrontation alone. Through making the path of least resistance go where you want to go." Harry thought about this. He thought about it carefully because he was beginning to understand that McGonagall was not simply angry. Anger was part of it, a clean, specific anger, but this was something more than anger. This was 30 years of understanding how power worked, applied in the specific direction of something she was completely certain about. She wasn't improvising. She'd known how these rooms worked for decades. She'd just never aimed herself at them directly before. He found it, honestly, extraordinary to watch. The Morning Post brought one more letter, this one by Personal Owl, a small, fast one that Harry recognized as belonging to Hermione Granger. It landed on his shoulder with the urgency of a bird that had been sent at speed and handed him the letter with a look that suggested Hermione had briefed it on the importance of the mission. He opened it. "Harry, I've read the prophet. Are you all right? Where are you?" Ron's mum won't let anyone say anything, but she looked like she wanted to, and his dad looked. The handwriting speeded up here. "Harry, we knew something wasn't right, you never talked about them properly, and I thought about saying something last year, but I didn't know how, and I should have said something, and I'm sorry. Can I come? Tell me where you are. I've already looked up the relevant sections of the Wizarding Families Act 1947 and the Magical Child Welfare Standards, and I think your case is." The letter was 4 pages. Harry read all of it and felt something loosen in his chest that had been tight since Tuesday, the specific tightness of not knowing where his friends were in all of this. He wrote back, "I'm in Edinburgh. I'm fine. You're not allowed to be sorry. Yes, you can come." He looked at McGonagall. "Hermione Granger wants to come," he said. "She's welcome," McGonagall said. "She'll want to read the ward analysis. She already has opinions about the Wizarding Families Act 1947, he said. Something moved in McGonagall's expression that was the closest she came to warmth when discussing academic effort. "Then she'll be useful." Hermione arrived by afternoon, via flow from her parents' house, which meant she'd talked her parents into installing a FLU connection, which Harry thought probably indicated something about the current urgency of magical Britain's affairs bleeding into Muggle households adjacent to it. She arrived with a bag that was clearly charmed to be larger on the inside and had the expression she wore when she was very worried and was managing it through preparation. She looked at Harry for a long moment. "You look better," she said. "Than last year." "I am better," he said. She hugged him with the efficiency of someone performing a necessary action. He hugged her back. Over her shoulder he could see Lupin watching with the look of a man who found emotional scenes difficult and was managing it through deliberate blankness. Then she pulled back and looked at him with the full focus of Hermione Granger, whose brain had been working on a problem since she read the prophet that morning. "Tell me everything," she said. He told her everything. She listened with her hands folded in her lap and her eyes very bright, and she interrupted 4 times. Good interruptions, sharp ones, the kind that pulled at a thread in the narrative and made him explain it more precisely. When he finished she sat for a moment. Then she said, "The ward analysis. The argument that the blood wards were operating at reduced efficacy. Has anyone cross-referenced that with the events of Harry's first year? Because if the protection was already degraded, it's possible that Quirrell's ability to get as close to Harry as he did was partly related to the compromised ward conditions," Lupin said from the table, and looked at her. I hadn't followed that particular thread." Hermione went slightly pink in the way she did when she'd said something that was clearly right and knew it. "It's in the 3rd chapter of the ward analysis. The efficacy threshold. If the wards were below the threshold, their field doesn't extend." "Come here," Lupin said, pushing the ward analysis toward her. She sat down at the table and was reading within 30 seconds. Harry sat down beside her. The 3 of them read and argued about it, Hermione aggressive and precise, Lupin defensive and then persuaded and then excited, Harry following the logic between them and asking the questions that needed asking. McGonagall, Harry noticed, had stopped working and was watching. Not listening, exactly, she clearly understood the argument, but watching the 3 of them around the table, and her expression had something in it that he couldn't read until later when he thought about it, and what it was, he thought, was something like, "This is what it was supposed to be." "Add it," McGonagall said. "As an appendix to the ward analysis. Lupin, you'll co-author it with Miss Granger." Hermione looked up from the document and then at McGonagall and then did something Harry had never seen Hermione Granger do when presented with an academic task, which was hesitate. "We're not in school, Miss Granger," McGonagall said. "You don't need permission to do good work." Hermione straightened. She picked up a quill. She started writing. Dumbledore's move came on Thursday. Not through the press, not through Fudge, not through the Wisengamot, through Hogwarts itself. which was in some ways his most elegant play and in other ways the clearest indication that the other avenues had failed. The Hogwarts Board of Governors convened an emergency session and issued a formal notification requiring McGonagall to vacate her quarters at the school within 30 days. It was dressed up in language about transitional arrangements and orderly succession of house responsibilities, but the mechanism was obvious. Dumbledore couldn't touch her here, in Edinburgh, but he could close the door to Hogwarts behind her. Make it cost her. Make her feel the loss of the institution she'd given her career to. Harry watched her read the notification. She read it twice. She set it down. She stood up and went to the window and looked out at the Edinburgh street for exactly 15 seconds, he counted, and then she turned back around and picked up her quill. "He thinks I want to go back," she said. "Don't you?" Harry asked. He asked it genuinely because it seemed important to ask genuinely. She considered it with the honesty she brought to everything. "I want students to be taught properly," she said. "I want a generation of witches and wizards who can transfigure something more complicated than a matchstick by 6th year, and who understand that precision in magic is not a technical skill but a philosophical commitment." She looked at the notification. "I can do that without Hogwarts. I've been doing it in this kitchen for 3 weeks." He looked at her. "Hermione Granger," she said, with the smallest elevation of one eyebrow, "has advanced her understanding of ancient magical theory by approximately 1 full academic year in 48 hours. Harry looked at Hermione, who was at the table and had clearly heard this and was doing an extremely poor job of pretending she hadn't, and was entirely composed. "The notification goes to my solicitor," McGonagall said. "Aldrich will respond. Dumbledore has handed me something useful, actually." "How?" Lupin asked. "Because the board's action is retaliatory. It follows the filing of the petition and the publication of the welfare story. The timing is undeniable. If I need to demonstrate, at any point, that there is institutional pressure being applied against the people pursuing Harry's interests," she set the notification down, "this is Exhibit A." Sirius would have enjoyed this, Harry thought. He thought about where Sirius was, warm somewhere, moving, doing what needed to be done with 9 days to go, and felt the familiar mixture of concern and fierce, grounded confidence that had replaced the old anxious not hoping. "There's something else," Lupin said. He had the careful quality he used when he was about to say something he'd been deciding whether to say. "I had a letter from Dumbledore. This morning." He paused. "He wants to meet with me." The room went quiet. "He wants to talk to you before the hearing," McGonagall said. "Not a question. He says he's concerned about my involvement. That I may not fully appreciate the implications of what I'm." Lupin stopped. "He says the same things he always says. Very reasonably. In the voice that makes you feel like the unreasonable one for not agreeing." "Are you going to go?" Harry asked. Lupin looked at him. Something in his face was complicated in the way that it always was when he was honest about something difficult. "Part of me wants to," he said. "Not because I'm wavering. But because," he stopped. He tried again. "He was important to me. For a very long time. He was the person who made it possible for me to come to Hogwarts at all. Who looked at what I was and decided I was worth educating." He looked at the table. "That's not nothing." "No," Harry said. "It's not." Lupin looked up. "But it's also not enough," Harry said. "What someone did for you doesn't mean you owe them this." He said it without heat, without performance, just plainly, the way you say something that is simply true. "He knew about my file. He chose to keep me there. He's using what he did for you to keep you from being part of fixing it. That's not how people who love you use what they've given you." The room was very quiet. Hermione had stopped writing. Lupin looked at Harry for a long moment. His throat moved once. "When did you get so?" he started. 13, Harry said. "I've had time to think." Something in Lupin's face broke open very briefly, the specifically Lupin breakage, the one that looked like grief and was partly something else, something to do with James and what James would have made of this moment, his son at a kitchen table in Edinburgh being wiser at 13 than most people managed in 40. "I won't go," Lupin said. "Right back," McGonagall said. "Say you're occupied. Don't antagonize him, don't explain yourself. Just, occupied." A pause. "He'll understand the message." The Prophet ran a second story on Friday. This one was different in tone, more opinion than report, a piece by someone whose byline Harry didn't recognize but whose style reminded him of the kind of writing that was trying to seem measured while being essentially a character assassination. It ran on page 3, under the headline McGonagall's Crusade, Personal Grudge or Principled Stand. The article questioned her judgment. It raised, without quite stating, the possibility that her resignation had been emotional rather than ethical. It mentioned, 3 times, that she had worked closely with Dumbledore for 3 decades, which was framed somehow as evidence of instability in departing from him rather than evidence of genuine knowledge of his methods. It was well done, Harry thought. In the specific sense that it was precise and subtle and clearly written by someone who knew exactly how to imply things while remaining technically deniable. It was, in other words, the kind of writing that had Dumbledore's fingerprints all over it without his name anywhere near it. McGonagall read it. She put the paper down. "Which of the 3 times it mentions your length of service," Harry said, "is the one that bothers you most?" She looked at him. "None of them. They're all the same implication. That you wouldn't have left if you were thinking clearly." "Yes." She was quiet for a moment. "The argument is designed to make the years I spent there look like they belong to a version of me that has now malfunctioned. As though 30 years of professional loyalty are evidence of something wrong rather than the ground from which a reasonable person makes a reasonable assessment." "But you did make the assessment because of the years," Harry said. "Because you knew what it should have been." She looked at him with the revision of assessment look. "Yes," she said. "Exactly. The 30 years are why I can read that file and know precisely how wrong it is. Not despite them. Because of them." She picked up her quill. "Bones will respond." "I don't need to." "Do you want to?" Harry asked. She paused. "I want to," she said, "go to the hearing, present the evidence, and let the facts respond." She put the quill down. "That's how you answer this kind of thing. Not by defending yourself against the implication. By making the implication irrelevant." Harry nodded slowly. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "Yes." "Are you scared?" "Of the hearing?" She was quiet for a moment. Not the quiet of avoidance, the quiet of honest consideration. "Of the hearing itself, no," she said. "I've testified before Wisengamot panels. I know what the process is. I know our case." She folded her hands. "What I am concerned about is the specific moment when Dumbledore speaks. Because he will speak. He'll be there, and he will speak, and he will be very good. He's always been very good." She looked at Harry. "My concern is not that he'll win. I don't believe he'll win, the case is too strong. My concern is that he'll say something that is true. Something we can't argue with because it's actually true. And that the something that's true will be about you." Harry thought about this. "Like what?" he said. "Like the fact that you have survived," she said. "Like the fact that Voldemort has not been able to kill you, which is the only metric he actually cares about. Like the fact that whatever the cost of his decisions, the boy is alive and the Dark Lord is weakened." She met his eyes. "That argument works on people. Because it is technically true. It's also terrible," Harry said. "Yes," she said. "It's terrible and it's technically true. Those 2 things can both be real simultaneously, and Dumbledore understands that better than almost anyone." Harry sat with this. He sat with it for a while, the way you sit with something that's uncomfortable but important. The thing is, he said finally, it's also not the only metric. Whether I'm alive isn't the only thing that matters about whether someone is taken care of properly. He paused. Plants are alive if you just give them the minimum amount of water. That doesn't mean you're gardening well. McGonagall looked at him. Say that, she said. At the hearing. Say exactly that. I'm not going to be at the hearing to talk about myself, he said. I'm there to testify about Sirius. You will be asked about yourself, she said. By someone, at some point, if not directly then by implication. When that happens, she gestured at what he'd just said, the general direction of it. He nodded. He sat back. Ptolemy appeared from somewhere and settled on his feet under the table, a comfortable weight. What about Sirius's testimony, he said. He'll be under Veritaserum. If he consents to it, yes, she said. Which he will. He's been trying to tell the truth for 12 years. Veritaserum is just the mechanism by which a room full of people who don't want to believe him are forced to hear it. She looked at the clock. He's back in 6 days. We'll go through the whole proceeding with him before he turns himself in. Harry thought about 6 days. He thought about the hearing, 2 weeks and 1 day now, and the shape of what had to happen in it, the careful structure of evidence and testimony and legal argument that McGonagall and Bones had been building since the night of the staff meeting. He thought about Dumbledore in the room. Dumbledore watching all of this from the opposite end of the table with those blue eyes and that undisturbable composure and the specific intelligence of a man who had been playing this particular game for half a century. He's going to have something, Harry said. Something we don't know about yet. A move we haven't planned for. He always has something. McGonagall looked at him. Yes, she said. He will. So what do we do about that? She was quiet for a moment. This, Harry had come to understand, was the real thinking quiet, not the controlled reaction quiet. We build the case so strong, she said, that whatever he has, it isn't enough. She straightened. That's what you do when you're dealing with someone who is always going to be cleverer than your plan. You make your case robust enough to survive his cleverness. Harry nodded. He got up and refilled his tea. He sat back down. He pulled Lupin's ward analysis toward him and opened it to the new appendix, Hermione and Lupin's edition, the argument about the compromised efficacy and Quirrell and first year. He started reading it again from the beginning. What are you doing? Hermione asked. She'd been quiet for the last 20 minutes, reading something of her own. Making sure I know the argument as well as they do, he said. So that if Dumbledore says something in that room and nobody else can answer it quickly enough, I can. She looked at him. Then she pulled the ward analysis toward herself and started reading beside him. They sat there together in the afternoon light, the two of them going through the documents page by page, and the kitchen hummed with the specific energy of people who were not underestimating the thing they were up against but were not frightened by it either. Lupin came in at 4:30 with more books. He looked at them both and sat down without comment and opened a book and started working. McGonagall, at her end of the table, was drafting something in careful, precise handwriting, and Harry glanced at it sideways and could see it was the opening statement for the hearing, and it was the most beautiful piece of controlled, precise, devastating written argument he had ever seen in his life, including everything in Hermione's essays, which were not nothing. The room was full of the rustling of paper and the scratch of quills and the Edinburgh afternoon going gold outside the windows. Outside, Britain was watching. The letters were piling up. The prophet was doing what newspapers did. Dumbledore was doing what Dumbledore did. Inside, 4 people, 1 disgraced professor, 1 accused murderer's paperwork, 1 werewolf, 1 13-year-old, and a girl who had memorized the Wizarding Families Act 1947 in an afternoon, were building something he was going to have to actually reckon with. Harry went to bed late and lay awake for a while looking at the ceiling. This was not insomnia, exactly. It was the specific wakefulness of someone who had a lot to think about and had been thinking about it carefully and needed the dark and the quiet to finish the last of it. He thought about the hearing. He thought about speaking in it. He thought about standing in a room full of people who had all made their decisions about who he was, the boy who lived, the troubled child, the symbol, the liability, and saying something true. He thought about what true thing he wanted to say. Not about Sirius, because he knew what he'd say about Sirius. He'd say what he'd seen, plainly, the way it happened, and the plainness of it was its own argument. But about himself. "You are technically alive," Dumbledore would say, or something like it. The metric of protection was survival, and you have survived. And Harry would think about the smallest bedroom and the broken window latch and the meal standing up in the kitchen and Madame Pomfrey writing "He thanked me for it," like it was a gift in her medical notes. Plants are alive if you give them the minimum amount of water. He thought about Privet Drive and he thought about this house, Edinburgh, the kitchen table, the smell of something cooking, McGonagall's voice saying eat and meaning it as care rather than instruction. He thought about Lupin sitting across from him and saying "I'm sorry" and then picking up a quill. He thought about Sirius's laugh, the real one. He thought about Hermione arriving through the fire with her enormous bag and the Wizarding Family's Act 1947 already memorized. He thought, this is what it was supposed to feel like. Not just this, exactly. Not Edinburgh specifically. But the general shape of it. Being somewhere, being with people, he searched for the word and found it, and it was simple. Wanted. Not needed, not useful, not the thing that had to survive because of what it meant for everyone else. Wanted. In the room. At the table. It was not a revolutionary thing to want. He understood that. He knew it was the most ordinary human want there was, and he was aware that lots of people had it and he hadn't, and he had been aware of this at some level for a long time but had not had the vocabulary or the safety to actually sit with it until now. He lay there in the Edinburgh dark and he let himself sit with it. He was 13 years old and he was 4 days away from Sirius coming back and 10 days away from a hearing that was going to change a number of things, and he was in a room that was not the smallest one in the house, and downstairs someone had made soup deliberately, for him, as an act of care, and would do so again tomorrow. He was not happy in a simple way. He didn't think he was going to be happy in a simple way for a while, possibly ever. There was too much complicated ground between here and anything that could fairly be called simple. But there was something quieter than happiness that was present in a way it hadn't been before. He thought the word for it might be safe. He let himself think it. He let it sit. Then he closed his eyes and, for the first time in 3 weeks without any particular effort about it, he slept. Chapter 5, What Fire Does Sirius came back on a Wednesday, 2 days earlier than expected, and he came back different. Not different in the way Azkaban had made him different, that was a permanent alteration, something written into the architecture of him that wasn't going away. Harry had accepted this. Different in the way a person is different when they've made a final decision about something and the making of it has settled them. He came through the back gate at 7 in the morning, pack on his back, and he looked like a man who had gone somewhere and done something he needed to do and was ready now for whatever came next. Harry was on the shed roof. Not a shed here. McGonagall's back garden was walled and small and had a wooden bench along one side that he'd taken to sitting on in the mornings, but he was up early and he saw Sirius come through the gate and Sirius saw him and they looked at each other across the small garden in the thin morning light. "You're early," Harry said. "Finished early," Sirius said. He set his pack down. He looked better, not well, not undamaged, but better in the specific way of someone who had eaten regularly and slept somewhere real for a week. "I went to see someone. About Pettigrew." Harry straightened. "Did you find him?" "No," Sirius said. "But I found someone who might be able to. Old contact. Someone who operates in the right corners of things." He sat down on the bench. "It's a long shot. But I wanted it tried before the hearing, not after." He looked at his hands. "If Pettigrew surfaces during the trial, in any direction, even rumors of him, it changes the shape of the argument." Harry came and sat beside him. "How?" he said. "Right now the case for my innocence rests on the testimony of a werewolf and a 13-year-old, Sirius said. Not bitterly, plainly. Lupin's testimony is strong, but Dumbledore's people will go after the condition. They'll imply compromised reliability on the night in question. Your testimony is strong, but you're my godson, which means the relationship compromises the independence. He was quiet for a moment. Pettigrew alive and at large, however, is its own argument. Because if I killed him, as the official record states, and he's walking around somewhere, then the official record is simply wrong. That's not a question of testimony. That's a question of basic fact. And Dumbledore can't argue with basic facts, Harry said. He can try, Sirius said. But it gets harder. He looked at Harry. How are you? Ready, Harry said. Sirius studied him. She's been good, Harry said. He tried to find a better word and found that good was actually the right one, the specific right one, the one that meant all the things it needed to mean. She's been really good. Sirius nodded. His jaw worked once in the way Harry had learned meant he was sitting with an emotion he wasn't going to name yet. Your father would have liked her, he said. He did like her, actually, though he'd never have admitted it because she gave him detention more than anyone else in the school and his ego couldn't reconcile the two things. A pause. She scared him a bit. He'd never have admitted that either. Harry smiled. She scares me a bit, he said. She scares me a lot, Sirius said. And I've faced Azkaban. The pre-hearing session happened on Thursday, 2 days before the Wizengamot convened. Bones came to Edinburgh in person, which Harry had not expected. He'd assumed they'd flew to her, or to the ministry, but she arrived in the kitchen at 9 a.m. with her briefcase and her monocle and the bearing of a general reviewing her troops before a significant engagement, which was more or less what this was. She sat at the head of the table, which was the first time anyone had sat there besides McGonagall, and she looked around at the assembled group, McGonagall to her left, Sirius across from her, Harry beside Sirius, Hermione and Lupin at the far end, with the comprehensive efficiency of her default expression. I'll go through the full sequence, she said. No interruptions until I'm done, then questions. We have 1 day to make sure everyone knows their role and their limits. She opened her briefcase. The hearing is before a panel of 9 Wizengamot members. I've pushed for the full Wizengamot, but Ogden managed to keep it to a panel, which is both a limitation and an advantage. Limitation, 9 votes instead of the full body. Advantage, I know all 9 of them, and I've had conversations with 5 this week. Which 5? McGonagall asked. Marchbanks, Bones said. Clearwater. Diggory. Abbott. And Fawcett, who surprised me, honestly, but there we are. She set 5 folders on the table. The remaining 4 are Ogden himself, who is a Dumbledore vote regardless, Runcorn, who is persuadable but requires evidence he can characterize as objective, and 2 who will follow the room. She looked around the table. Which means the room matters. What about Dumbledore? Sirius said. His presence in the panel room. He's not on the panel, Bones said. He requested observer status, which is customary for the chief warlock. I attempted to block it. I was unsuccessful. A pause that contained a precise measure of professional frustration. He will be in the room. He will not have the floor unless invited. I will not be inviting him. He'll request it, McGonagall said. He'll request it, Bones agreed. And the panel chair, who is Marchbanks, will decide whether to grant it. She allowed herself a very small pause. Griselda Marchbanks has been on the Wizengamot since 1961. She examined Albus Dumbledore's NEWTS personally, which she tells me gives her a particular perspective on the experience of being the only person in the room who is not impressed by him. Sirius laughed. It was short but genuine. Good, he said. Bones looked at him. Your sequence. You will be brought in under escort, voluntary surrender, which has already been arranged with the Auror office, the paperwork filed this morning. The escort is 2 Aurors I trust. You will not be in restraints. I pushed hard for this and I got it, but it required me to put my personal guarantee on your appearance. She looked at him levelly. If you don't appear, it comes back to me. I'll be there, Sirius said. The simplicity of it was its own kind of gravity. Veritaserum will be offered, she said. You will accept. The questions will be asked by me, not by Ogden, not by Runcorn, not by anyone else. I have the standing as presenting counsel to conduct the examination. I will ask you the material questions. The panel can ask follow-up questions after, but the primary examination is mine. She looked at her notes. The questions will cover your activities on the night of October 31st, 1981. Your relationship with Peter Pettigrew. The Secret Keeper arrangement. What you witnessed after Voldemort's attack. She paused. What you did not do. Sirius was very still. Under Veritaserum, he said. Under Veritaserum. She met his eyes. Which means the room hears the truth from you, in your own words, verified. That is the most powerful thing we have, Mr. Black. Not the legal technicalities, though those are real and they matter, but the truth, heard in real time, from the person who lived it. She folded her hands. Are you prepared for that? For 12 years, he said, I have been prepared for that. Good. She turned to McGonagall. Your testimony covers the staff meeting, the welfare file, the documented pattern of neglect across 3 years. I want it precise and chronological. The emotional weight should come from the facts, not from your delivery of them. The panel needs to see a methodical, professional assessment, not a grievance. Understood, McGonagall said. It will be hard, Bones said. Not as a warning. As a fact offered between two people who understood each other. Some of what you'll be describing is going to sit badly in a room and some people in that room are going to be uncomfortable and they're going to want to take that discomfort out on the messenger. You've dealt with that before. Many times, McGonagall said. Bones looked at Harry. Mr. Potter, she said. You will testify regarding 2 things. First, the events in the Shrieking Shack, specifically what you heard Pettigrew say and in what circumstances. Second, she paused, your own experience of your home environment. Harry met her eyes. The second one is not required, she said. The Black case does not legally depend on it. But I'm asking you to consider it because Dumbledore's response, whatever form it takes, will almost certainly be framed around the argument that he did what was necessary and that the results justify the methods. She looked at him steadily. The counter to that argument is not legal. It's human. And you are the human in question. The table was quiet. I'll testify, Harry said. About both things. Bones nodded. No elaboration, no emotional acknowledgement of the weight of what he'd just agreed to. He found he appreciated this. It treated him as someone who had made a decision rather than someone who needed to be praised for it. We'll do a full run-through, she said. Today. All of you. I'll be asking the questions. I want to know where the hesitations are, where the language needs work, where someone is going to be caught out by a follow-up they didn't expect. She opened another folder. McGonagall, you first. It took 4 hours. Bones was not gentle about it. She asked questions, interrupted answers, challenged phrasings, pushed on every point that a hostile Wisengamot member might push on. She made Lupin go through his account of the Shrieking Shack 3 times until he was delivering it without the self-conscious guilt that had been softening his language and making it vulnerable to the implication of bias. She made McGonagall articulate the medical file's conclusions without editorial, just documentation, just the facts speaking their own devastating truth. She made Harry go through the Shrieking Shack twice and then looked at him. The second part, she said. Your home environment. Tell me. He told her. He told it the way he'd been thinking about it, not as a list of bad things, but as a pattern. The way September and June were different. The weight of the year mapped against the weeks at Privet Drive. The smallest bedroom, the broken window latch, the meals standing. The specific thing of not knowing that these were unusual things until he came to Hogwarts and saw how other people talked about their homes. When did you understand that it was not normal? Bones asked. He thought about it genuinely. When Ron described his house, he said. First week of first year. He described his bedroom at home, and the way he talked about it, he was embarrassed about it, he thought it was a mess, but the way he talked about it was the way you talk about something that belongs to you. Something that's yours. He paused. I'd never thought about a room that way before. I had the smallest bedroom because Dudley wanted mine for his second bedroom of toys and there was no argument about it, it just happened because that was what things were like. He stopped again. I thought that was just what it was like. I thought everyone's home was something you tolerated until you could leave. The room was completely quiet. Hermione was very still. She had the expression of someone exercising enormous self-control. One more question, Bones said. Her voice had not changed, professionally, but there was something different at the edges of it. Dumbledore will argue that you survived. That his decisions, whatever their cost, produced the result of keeping you alive. How do you respond to that? Harry looked at her. Surviving isn't the same as being taken care of, he said. You can keep a plant alive with the minimum amount of water. That's not gardening. That's just preventing something from dying. He paused. I deserve to be gardened properly. Every child does. Bones looked at him for a long moment. Don't change a word of that, she said. Friday was the last day before the hearing and the house was quiet with a specific kind of quiet, the pre-significant event quiet, the kind you don't fill unnecessarily. Hermione made notes. Lupin read. Sirius sat in the garden for most of the afternoon, not doing much, just being in the light and the air, which Harry understood without needing it explained. McGonagall worked in her study and the door was closed, which was new, she'd worked at the kitchen table every day until now, open, present. Harry knocked at 3:30. Come in, she said. Her study was a room he hadn't been in before. Smaller than the kitchen, 2 walls entirely books, a desk that was not tidy in the kitchen table sense but organized in a 3-dimensional, vertical way that suggested someone who knew exactly where everything was in a stack. She was sitting at it with her glasses on, reading something. Sit down, she said, without looking up. He sat in the chair across from the desk. He looked at the books, spines he recognized, spines he didn't, a section that appeared to be entirely dedicated to Transfiguration theory going back several centuries, a section of wizarding law, a section that appeared to be personal, letters, journals, a few items he couldn't identify. What do you need? She asked. Nothing specific, he said. I just thought, he stopped. He tried again. I wondered how you were. She looked up at him over her glasses. He held her gaze. She took off her glasses. She set them on the desk. She sat back in her chair in a way that was slightly different to her usual sitting, less composed, or a different kind of composed, the kind that wasn't performing anything. I'm prepared, she said. That's not what I asked. A beat. The Edinburgh afternoon light came through the window and sat on the books and the desk and the room smelled of old paper and the good specific smell of a place where someone had done a great deal of serious thinking. She started and stopped. She looked at the desk. Tomorrow I'm going to walk into a room where I've spent the last 30 years being very careful about which battles I chose. Being strategic. Being, she paused, diplomatic. In the Dumbledore sense of diplomatic, which means knowing which things not to say. She looked at Harry. Tomorrow I am going to say all of them. Good, he said. It will cost something, she said. Not the career, I'm not worried about the career. But the version of the story where Albus Dumbledore and I were simply colleagues who disagreed ends tomorrow. Whatever comes after, it will always have been that I was the person who did this. Yes, Harry said. That doesn't frighten me, she said. I want to be clear about that. I'm not saying it because I'm afraid. I know, he said. She looked at him. Why do you know? Because you're not the kind of person who would say it if it were fear, he said. You're saying it because it's true, and truth is what you do with. Not to hide things but to be accurate about them. She was quiet for a moment. You've been watching me, she said. I learn from good teachers, he said. Something moved in her face, and it was not controlled. For once, it was just there, brief and unguarded and entirely real, and then it was gone, back behind the composure, but he'd seen it and she knew he'd seen it, and neither of them was going to say anything about it, which was the right decision. Go and eat something, she said. The hearing starts at 9. We leave here at 8. He stood up. Professor McGonagall, he said. Harry. Thank you, he said. For reading the file. I know you've been thinking about that day in Surrey, the day you didn't, but you read the file. When you had it in front of you, you read it, and you stood up. That matters. She looked at him for a long moment. Go and eat, she said. Her voice was precisely the same as always. But she blinked once, which he noted, and he turned and went. They arrived at the ministry at 8:15. The atrium was busier than Harry had expected for a Saturday morning, people moving through it with the deliberate velocity of those who had heard something was happening and wanted to be proximate to it. Several heads turned when they walked in. Harry walked between McGonagall and Bones, Sirius and Lupin behind them. Hermione having been left at the house, she'd argued, briefly, and accepted the argument that witness support rather than attendance was the correct role for now, with the grace of someone who understood the logic even while resenting it. A photographer appeared from the direction of the lifts. The flash went. Harry did not react. He walked steadily forward and did not change his pace or his expression, and he heard McGonagall say, very quietly and very precisely, to the photographer, "One more and I'll transfigure your camera into something significantly less useful," and the photographer retreated. The courtroom was on level 10. Harry had been to the ministry before, but not this deep, not these corridors, which were stone-faced and low-lit and had the particular gravity of rooms that had seen a great deal of history and retained it in the walls. They walked through a waiting area where two aurors were already present, Sirius's escort, familiar to Bones, who nodded at them. Sirius looked at the aurors. He looked at the courtroom door. All right? Harry said quietly. Sirius looked at him. Ask me again after. After you'll be free, Harry said. So the answer will be yes. Sirius looked at him. Then he put one hand briefly on Harry's shoulder, not a grip, just a touch, just a landing, and turned to face the door. They went in. The courtroom was smaller than Harry had imagined. Stone walls, tiered seating in a horseshoe, 9 chairs at the center panel table. The tiered seating was public gallery, and it was, he hadn't expected this, full. The story in the Prophet had done its work. People had come. He spotted faces he half recognized. Ministry officials. A woman he thought was a Hogwarts governor. 3 journalists in a cluster to the left with quick quotes quills already active. And at the far side of the gallery, sitting very still, in deep blue robes, with his half-moon glasses and his white beard and his complete undisturbable composure, Albus Dumbledore. He looked at Harry when Harry came in. The look was gentle, patient, familiar, the look of a man who had always believed that given enough time he would be understood and forgiven. Harry met his eyes and held them for a moment and then looked away, not as a flinch, just as a redirect, because Dumbledore was not the point of today. Marchbanks was at the center of the panel, 92 years old and built like a small, precise bird who had decided long ago that precision was infinitely more useful than size. She had papery skin and very sharp eyes, and when she looked at Harry she gave him a nod that contained within it the specific density of a woman who had examined his magical potential and approved of what she'd found. Bones set her briefcase on the presenting table. McGonagall sat behind her to the right. Harry took the seat at the witness end, on the bench that faced the panel directly. Marchbanks called the session to order. The room went quiet. It went very quiet, the particular silence of a room full of people who understand they are present for something that matters, and Harry sat in it and breathed slowly and felt, underneath the expected anxiety, something that surprised him: readiness. He was ready. Bones went first. She laid the case with the economy of someone who understood that excess language was a weakness rather than a strength. The timeline: Harry's placement at Privet Drive in 1981. The welfare file. The medical documentation. The pattern across 3 years. The ward analysis, Lupin's pages, Hermione's appendix, presented as exhibits, summarized with the clarity of someone who had read every page 15 times. She was magnificent. Harry watched her and thought, this is what it looks like when someone has been practicing at the real thing their whole life and finally has a case worth it. Ogden tried to interrupt twice. Marchbanks shut him down both times with single sentences. Runcorn asked 3 questions, all good ones, all answered precisely by the documentation Bones produced. Harry watched Runcorn's face as he read the medical exhibit. He watched something shift in it. That was the moment, he thought. That was when Runcorn became a vote. Then McGonagall was called. She walked to the presenting position with the walk she used in corridors, not sweeping, not performative, just the walk of a woman who knew where she was going. She stood. She looked at the panel. She described the staff meeting. She described the folder. She described reading the file. She described reading Poppy's note at the bottom: Minerva, I am tired. Do something, and she read it aloud without any change in her voice, and the room was extraordinarily quiet. She was asked about her resignation. She explained it in 4 sentences, precise and logical. She was asked whether she believed Dumbledore had acted maliciously. She paused. No, she said. I believe he acted with complete certainty that he was correct, which is worse. Ogden objected. Marchbanks looked at him. The witness may characterize her interpretation, Marchbanks said. Proceed, Professor. McGonagall proceeded. She was asked about the ward analysis. She deferred to the documentation while making the argument plain: the protection Dumbledore cited as justification for the placement had been compromised by the placement itself. She said it without triumph. She said it as fact. She was asked, by one of the panel members Harry didn't know, whether she had personal affection for Harry Potter that might color her testimony. She looked at the panel member. I have professional responsibility for Harry Potter, she said. I should have exercised it more effectively for the past 3 years. I am exercising it now. She paused. Whether I have personal affection for him is not relevant to whether the documentation is accurate. And is it accurate? The panel member asked. Every word of it, she said. Dumbledore did not request the floor during McGonagall's testimony. He sat very still in the gallery and watched with those blue eyes, and Harry watched him watch her, and there was something in Dumbledore's face that Harry had never seen there before, and it took him a moment to identify it. Grief, he thought. Not regret, not strategy, genuine grief. He looked at McGonagall the way a man looks at something he has lost. Harry wasn't sure what to do with this. He filed it away. He kept his eyes on the panel. Sirius was called. He walked in escorted by the 2 Aurors but without restraints, as Bones had arranged, and he walked steadily to the seat at the front, and he sat down and he looked at the panel with the look of someone who has nothing left to lose and has discovered this makes you incredibly, remarkably calm. Bones administered the Veritaserum herself. 3 drops. Sirius sat quietly and let it work. His eyes went slightly glassy and then cleared. Sirius Oran Black, Bones said. Did you betray the location of James and Lily Potter to Lord Voldemort on the 31st of October, 1981? No, Sirius said. Who was the Potter's secret keeper? Peter Pettigrew. Why was the secret keeper changed from yourself to Pettigrew? Because I suggested it. I thought I would be the obvious choice and therefore the obvious target. I thought Peter was safer. I thought, his voice did something, very briefly, I thought Peter was loyal. Was Peter Pettigrew working for Voldemort at the time of the Potters' deaths? Yes. Did you kill Peter Pettigrew? No. Is Peter Pettigrew alive? Yes. The room moved. Not a sound, exactly, but a physical thing, a collective shift, 12 people simultaneously adjusting to what they'd just heard. Bones let it sit for exactly the right number of seconds. Where is Peter Pettigrew now? She asked. I don't know, Sirius said. The last place I saw him was the Shrieking Shack in Hogsmeade, the night of the 2nd of June this year. He escaped by transforming. Into what? A rat. Another movement in the room. She let this one sit too. Were there witnesses present in the Shrieking Shack on the night of June 2nd? Yes. Who? Harry Potter. Hermione Granger. Ronald Weasley. Remus Lupin. A pause. And Peter, before he ran. Bones stepped back. No further questions under Veritaserum. The Veritaserum is hereby confirmed as administered and active by the Ministry Potions Office. She looked at the panel. The witness is available for panel questioning. Marchbanks looked at the other panel members. 2 had questions. Both were simple and Sirius answered them cleanly. Ogden had 4 questions, all of them pointed, all of them clearly aimed at undermining the testimony, and Sirius answered every single one of them with the flat, calm, chemical certainty of a man under Veritaserum who does not have anything to hide. Ogden sat back. He had the expression of a man who had played the hand he had and found it wasn't enough. Then Marchbanks said, the chair recognizes the request for observer comment from Albus Dumbledore. Harry felt the room change. Dumbledore rose. He moved to the speaking position with the slow, considered grace of a man who understood the power of making a room wait for him. He looked at the panel. He looked at Sirius. He looked, last, at Harry. Thank you, Griselda, he said. His voice was warm and measured and completely at home in this room, which was exactly the point, exactly the move. He looked at the panel. I would not ordinarily speak during a proceeding of this kind. But I believe there is context that the panel should have before it reaches its conclusions. Marchbanks said nothing. This was its own communication. The decisions I made regarding Harry Potter's placement, Dumbledore said, were not made lightly or carelessly. They were made with full knowledge of their personal cost to Harry, and with full weight given to that cost, and with the conclusion that the alternative, leaving Harry without the ancient magical protection that his mother's sacrifice created, was simply too dangerous to consider. He paused. I was not indifferent to Harry's comfort. I was prioritizing his survival. Silence. The boy is alive, Dumbledore said. Voldemort attacked him 4 times in 3 years, and he survived every time. The protection held. Whatever the conditions of its maintenance, the protection held. He let this sit in the room. It sat heavily. Harry watched the panel and saw Runcorn's face doing something complicated, saw one of the follow-the-room members reconsidering, saw exactly what McGonagall had told him would happen, the argument landing, because it was technically true, because survival was undeniable. Harry stood up. He didn't wait to be called. He was in the witness gallery, not the floor, and Marchbanks looked at him with her sharp eyes and after 1 second she said, the chair recognizes Harry Potter. Dumbledore turned. He looked at Harry, and his expression was, still. The gentlest version of still. Not hostile. Not calculating, in that moment. Something that was very nearly helpless in an old, resigned way. Harry looked at him. He didn't look away. He looked at him the way you look at something you've decided not to be afraid of. Everything you just said is true, Harry said. He said it to Dumbledore directly. I'm alive. The protection worked, to some degree. You made decisions you believed were necessary. He paused. You're also describing keeping a plant alive with the minimum amount of water and calling it gardening. It's not the same thing. The room was absolutely silent. I had a cupboard, Harry said. Until I was 11, I slept in the cupboard under the stairs. I cooked meals for a family that didn't speak to me unless they needed something from me. I wore my cousin's clothes 4 sizes too large because no one bought me anything that fit. I had a broken window latch in my bedroom for the last 3 years and no one fixed it. He kept his voice level because leveling it was a choice, a good choice, the one that made people listen rather than react. I went to Hogwarts for 3 years. I came back every summer thinner and more tired. Madame Pomfrey documented it every single year. And the headmaster knew, and the placement was maintained, and the justification was that I was alive. He looked at Dumbledore. Being alive isn't enough, he said. It has never been enough. Every child on Earth is owed more than the minimum required to keep them breathing, and you knew that, sir, because you are one of the most intelligent people alive, and the fact that you used intelligence to build a justification for the minimum instead of using it to find a better solution means the intelligence was in service of a choice, not a necessity. He paused. I don't think you're evil. I think you made a calculation and you made it wrong and then you kept making it for 12 years because stopping meant admitting the error. He kept his eyes on Dumbledore's face. Sirius Black sat in Azkaban for 12 years without a trial because you made a calculation. That was also wrong. Dumbledore looked at him. And there it was again, the thing Harry had seen from across the gallery during McGonagall's testimony. Not composure. Not strategy. The grief. The genuine, deep, awful grief of a man who had been absolutely certain he was doing the right thing and was standing in a room full of evidence that he wasn't, delivered by the person he'd done it to. He did not respond. He stood for a moment, just stood, and then he went back to his seat. Marchbanks looked at the panel. The panel will deliberate, she said. It took 40 minutes. They waited in a side room, McGonagall, Sirius, Bones, Harry, Lupin. Sirius sat in a chair and said nothing for most of it, which was not the silence of anxiety but of a man who was very deliberately not hoping yet because the habit was too old and too defensive to break easily. Harry sat beside him. He didn't say anything either. Sometimes that was the right thing. McGonagall stood at the window of the side room looking out at the ministry corridor. Lupin made tea that no one drank. Bones reviewed documents she had already read, which was her version of the same thing. At the 38-minute mark, Sirius said, very quietly, "Thank you. All of you." He looked at Harry. "Especially you." "Don't," Harry said. "You were innocent the whole time. That was always true. We just had to make the room hear it." The door opened. One of the Aurors looked in. "The panel's ready," he said. They went back in. Marchbanks looked at the assembled room with the expression of a woman who had been doing this since 1961 and knew exactly how to carry a verdict. "The panel finds, unanimously," she said, "that Sirius Orion Black was unlawfully detained without trial in violation of wizarding law. The panel finds that the evidence presented establishes no legal basis for conviction of any charge originally cited at the time of his arrest. The panel orders his immediate release from all legal encumbrances and exonerates him fully." She paused. "The panel further orders a formal review of the welfare provisions for Harry James Potter, to be conducted by the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, with recommendations for revised guardianship to be submitted within 30 days. She looked directly at Dumbledore. "The panel notes the documented involvement of the Chief Warlock in the maintenance of welfare conditions found to be inadequate, and recommends this be subject to a separate inquiry." The gallery erupted. Not chaos, it was a formal setting and most of the people in it were ministry officials, but the controlled eruption of a room where something significant had just been officially said. The journalists were writing. 3 people were talking at once. Ogden was very still. Sirius sat perfectly still. Harry looked at him. His face was the face of a man hearing his own name cleared in a room full of witnesses after 12 years. It was not a joyful face, not yet, it was too new, too raw, too much, it had no shape yet to hold the size of it. Harry put his hand on Sirius's arm. Sirius looked at him. "Told you," Harry said. Sirius's face did the thing it did, the thing that was going to take a long time to stop being heartbreaking, the smile that came from somewhere that hadn't been touched in 12 years and was surprised to find itself still working. "Yeah," he said. "You did." McGonagall was standing. She was not celebrating. She was watching Dumbledore. Harry looked too. Dumbledore sat in his gallery seat, very still, very blue-eyed, very old in a way he had not looked at the beginning of the day. He was looking at Harry. And Harry looked back, and between them was everything that had just been said in this room and everything that was going to come after it and all the complicated, unkillable truth of both of them being exactly who they were. Then Dumbledore gave Harry a very small nod. Not concession, not approval, something more complicated than either. Something that might have been, in the vocabulary of a man who did not do simple things simply, acknowledgement. Harry nodded back. Bones was beside McGonagall and they were saying something to each other in low voices, and then Bones looked at Harry. "The guardianship review will take 30 days, she said. The panel will have recommendations. I'll be one of the voices making them." She looked at him steadily. "You have options, Harry. Real ones. And whoever ends up making the formal recommendation, the outcome is going to reflect what you want. You understand?" "Yes," he said. "What do you want?" she said. He looked at Sirius. He looked at McGonagall. He thought about the kitchen table in Edinburgh and the morning light and the sound of someone deliberately making soup. "I want to stay where I am," he said. "And I want Sirius to be there too." Bones looked at McGonagall. McGonagall looked at Harry with an expression that was entirely composed and also, underneath it, so completely and precisely warm that it was impossible to miss. 30 days, she said. "We'll manage." Chapter 6, After the morning after the hearing, Harry slept until 9. This was not a thing he did. His body had been wired for early rising since before he could remember it, the privet drive programming too deep to simply override, and he'd spent the entire Edinburgh stay waking at 6 regardless of when he went to bed. But the day after the hearing he opened his eyes and the light through the curtains was high and gold and the clock on the bedside table said 9:12 and he lay there and thought, oh. He lay there for a few minutes, just lying there, which was also not something he usually did. Usually waking up was the beginning of being usefully occupied. This morning he let himself be horizontal for a little longer and listened to the house. Voices downstairs. McGonagall's, precise and low. Sirius's, slightly louder. Something that sounded like an argument about eggs, which was not a sentence he'd expected to construct in his head, but there it was. Ptolemy was asleep on the foot of his bed in the specific immovable way of cats who have decided a location is theirs and are prepared to defend this position philosophically. He got up. He dressed. He went downstairs. The kitchen was busier than usual. Sirius was at the stove in what appeared to be a borrowed jumper of Lupin's. It was too narrow in the shoulders and too long in the arms, and he was cooking with the focused energy of someone who had not been able to cook for himself in 12 years and was making up for it. Lupin was at the table with the prophet spread in front of him and an expression of someone managing a complicated set of emotions very carefully. McGonagall was at her end of the table with a cup of tea and the unmistakable posture of a woman who had already been awake for 3 hours and had things well in hand. The prophet's headline was visible from the doorway. Black exonerated, Wisengamot panel finds unlawful detention. Dumbledore faces separate inquiry. Below it, a photograph of the courtroom steps, taken after the hearing. McGonagall in front, not looking at the camera but walking, which somehow made her look more formidable than if she had been. Sirius beside her, and beside Sirius, Harry. Looking at the camera without particularly meaning to, just looking at it, and in the photograph he was 13 years old and he was walking and his expression was, he studied it from across the kitchen, not triumphant, not relieved. It was the expression of someone who had expected something to happen and it had happened and now there were other things to do. He sat down. Sirius looked around from the stove and said, "Eggs?" "Yes please," Harry said. Sirius made eggs. He made them properly, with something green in them that turned out to be herbs from the garden McGonagall apparently had along the south-facing wall, and he put a plate in front of Harry with the satisfaction of a man performing a simple domestic act as an act of profound meaning, which is what it was. They ate. The kitchen was warm. The paper sat in the middle of the table with its enormous headline. "There will be reporters," Lupin said, folding the paper. "Outside. Possibly already." He looked at McGonagall. "They've been outside since yesterday afternoon," she said. "Dorothea Blunt from the Prophet has sent 4 owls. Rita Skeeter sent 6, which tells you something about relative journalistic ethics." "What did you say?" Harry asked. "I told Blunt I would speak to her Monday. I told Skeeter I wouldn't speak to her at all." She took a sip of tea. "I've told the others the same. Monday. Controlled, prepared, our framing, our terms." She looked at Sirius. "Which includes you, Mr. Black." Sirius, who had been about to say something, appeared to reconsider. "You want me to give a statement," he said. "I want you to sit next to me in a professionally conducted interview and answer exactly the questions you're asked in exactly the way we've discussed and not improvise," she said. "Yes. A beat." "I improvise well," Sirius said. "I know," she said. "That's why I'm asking you not to." Lupin made a sound that was not a laugh but was adjacent to one and didn't look up from his tea. Sirius looked at Harry as though seeking support. "She's right," Harry said. "You're 13, Sirius said. "Doesn't make her wrong," Harry said. Sirius pointed at him with his fork. "You are exactly like your father except your father would have been on my side." "My father let you talk him into switching secret keepers," Harry said mildly. The room went very quiet for exactly 1 second, and then Sirius laughed, the real, full laugh, the one that started somewhere deep and came out complete, the laugh Harry had been cataloguing with the slightly obsessive attention of someone who wanted to hear it as often as possible because it was proof of something important. He laughed and Lupin's face did its fracture and recover thing and McGonagall looked at her teacup with an expression of profound composure that was doing a great deal of work. "Fair enough," Sirius said. The 30 days moved differently from the weeks before the hearing. Before, time had the texture of preparation, purposeful, building, every day adding something to the structure. After, time had a different texture. Not empty, not purposeful in the same driven way. More like the time after a long journey when you've arrived somewhere and are working out what it means to stay. Bones filed the formal guardianship recommendation on day 8. It was 23 pages long and Harry read all of it. The central recommendation was that his guardianship be transferred from Petunia Desley to Minerva McGonagall, with Sirius Black named as secondary guardian pending the finalization of his legal status, and with Remus Lupin listed as designated adult contact for purposes of educational and welfare decision-making. He read his own name in these documents as a subject rather than an author and felt the strangeness of it. Someone else writing "this child requires a home" as a legal instruction, as though it were a thing that needed to be officially said before anyone would do it. But it did need to be officially said. He understood that. That was the nature of institutions, they moved on paper, not on feeling, and the paper was what made it real and made it stick. McGonagall had known this before he did, which was why she'd spent 3 weeks writing things down rather than simply acting. McGonagall signed the document on a Wednesday morning without ceremony. She read it through once, which was more thoroughness than a person who'd already read it 17 times required, and she signed it and dated it and sealed it and handed it to Aldrich von Price, her solicitor, who was a small gray man with a large gray briefcase and the specific professional satisfaction of someone who had been watching for 20 years for a case as clearly argued as this one. "The ministry will confirm within 5 days, von Price said. "Good," McGonagall said. Harry looked at the document on the table, sealed now, official, and he thought about Petunia Desley opening her own copy when it arrived, and what she would feel: relief, probably. Some version of relief that no longer had to dress itself up as anything else. He felt nothing dramatic about this. He felt specific. He felt the specific sensation of a door closing on a room you'd lived in for a long time and did not want to go back to. Not a slam. Just a close. He looked at McGonagall. "Thank you," he said. "Don't thank me," she said, which was what she always said when he thanked her, and like always it did not mean "you're not welcome" but something more precise, something more like this required no gratitude because it was simply the correct thing to do. He had stopped arguing with this. He'd started understanding it. Sirius, officially exonerated and officially existing in legal terms for the first time in 12 years, had to navigate the specific administrative chaos of being a person again. This turned out to be considerable. There was a vault at Gringotts that had been locked for 12 years and which contained, when Sirius and Harry visited it together on a bright Thursday morning, a substantial amount of gold and several items in a sealed chest that Sirius sat with for a long time in the vault's underground light. He didn't open the chest that day. Harry waited beside him and didn't ask, and eventually Sirius stood up and said, "Next time," and Harry said, "Whenever you want," and they went back upstairs into Diagon Alley. Diagon Alley, it turned out, knew who Sirius Black was. They were recognized within 30 seconds. Harry was used to this: the double take, the pointing, the specific suspended quality of a street that has noticed something, but Sirius was not, having been recognized for the last 12 years as a wanted criminal rather than a freed man, and the difference in the quality of the recognition was visible in the people around them. Women stopped to stare. A man at the apothecary door shook Sirius's hand with the grip of someone expressing something too large for words. A very small girl tugged her mother's sleeve and pointed at Harry and said, "That's him, that's the one from the paper," and the mother looked faintly embarrassed and Harry smiled at the girl, just smiled, and she beamed back with the uncomplicated joy of someone too young to be complicated about anything. "This is strange," Sirius said, as they walked. "Which part?" "All of it." He looked around at the street. "The last time I walked here freely I was 21. Everything is the same and I am not." He paused. "The robed shop is still there. That robed shop has been there since I was in school. It's exactly the same, the sign is exactly the same, and I have been in Azkaban for 12 years and come out the other side and the robed shop is completely indifferent to this information." "Is that comforting or horrifying?" Harry asked. Sirius thought about it. "Both," he said. "Mostly comforting. The world continuing means there's world to come back to." They went into the robed shop. Sirius bought robes. He bought a lot of robes, in the slightly disbelieving way of someone who has been wearing the same thing for 12 years and is suddenly confronted with the reality of options. He held up a set of deep blue dress robes and looked at Harry. "Too much," he said. "Buy them," Harry said. He bought them. He also bought Harry a set of robes that fit him, without making a production of it, just picked them up while Harry was looking at something else and added them to the pile, and when Harry noticed and started to say something Sirius said, "Don't," with the single-focused weight of a man who has been waiting a long time to do this specific ordinary thing, and Harry said, "All right," and let him. They had lunch at the Leaky Cauldron. Tom the barman, who had been running the place for longer than anyone could reliably remember, brought them butterbeer without being asked and stood there for a moment looking at both of them with the expression of a man who had lived through a great deal of wizarding history and was prepared to be moved by it. "Good to see you, Mr. Black," Tom said. "Good to see you right and proper." "Good to be seen," Sirius said, quietly. The inquiry into Dumbledore was filed formally on day 12. Harry didn't find out from Bones or from McGonagall. He found out from the Prophet, which ran it on the front page on a Tuesday morning with a headline that was less dramatic than its predecessors precisely because the newspaper understood that the story had passed the threshold where drama was required. It had become, simply, news. Formal inquiry filed against Dumbledore, Wisengamot Oversight Committee convenes. He read the article. It was careful and factual and quoted unnamed ministry sources extensively and made it clear that the inquiry was specifically about the welfare documentation and the governance of Harry's placement, not about Dumbledore's role in the First War or his position as Chief Warlock, which remained intact pending the inquiry's conclusions. Harry set the paper down. He thought about Dumbledore's face at the hearing. The grief in it. He thought about what McGonagall had said, "He's not evil, he made a calculation and made it wrong and then kept making it for 12 years. He thought about the nod, across the courtroom, after Harry had finished speaking. He thought about what it cost a man like that to nod. He thought about whether he wanted the inquiry to destroy Dumbledore. He sat with this honestly because it deserved honesty. He didn't want destruction. He wasn't sure he wanted anything as clear as justice, which was a word that implied a resolution, and he didn't think there was a resolution available that would make the history different. What had happened had happened. The file existed. The years existed. The cupboard existed. What he wanted, he thought, was accountability. The specific thing where the truth is officially on record in a room full of people who can't pretend they didn't hear it. Not punishment, not primarily, but the end of the version of events where what happened at Privet Drive was an acceptable cost. He wanted it to be on the record that it wasn't. That was already done. The hearing had done that. The inquiry would add to it, and he would cooperate with the inquiry when it required his cooperation, but it wasn't the center of anything for him anymore. He was realizing, with some surprise, that the center had shifted. He got up and went to find McGonagall. She was in the garden. This was unusual, she worked inside, almost always, but it was a warm July day and she was sitting on the bench along the south wall with a folder in her lap and her face in the light, not working exactly, just sitting, which was also unusual and which he noted without comment. He sat beside her. She looked at the garden. He looked at the garden. Ptolemy was hunting something in the far corner with elaborate theatrical stalking that was almost certainly unsuccessful. "The inquiry's been filed," he said. "I know," she said. "Amelia called this morning. What does it mean for Dumbledore?" She was quiet for a moment. "In the short term, the Chief Warlock position is effectively ceremonial while the inquiry runs. He retains the title but his operational authority is limited. In the longer term," she paused, "it depends on the inquiry's findings. The most likely outcome is a formal censure and some form of restructured oversight for the Hogwarts headship. He's unlikely to lose the position entirely. Is that enough?" She looked at him. "What do you think?" "I think," Harry said slowly, "that the thing I wanted was for it to be on record. For it to be something that happened officially, not something that got talked around." He paused. "The hearing did that. The inquiry makes it permanent. Whether he loses his job is," he tried to find the word, "secondary. To me." She studied him. "You're not angry at him," she said. "Not a question." "I'm angry at what happened," Harry said. "It's different." He thought about how to say the rest of it. "He's a person who made a wrong decision and defended it for too long. I know what that is. I've done it on a smaller scale. The difference between me and him is the scale and the people it affected." McGonagall was quiet. "That is a remarkably generous interpretation," she said finally. "It's not generous," he said. "Generous would be forgiving him. I haven't decided about forgiving him. But I can be accurate about what he is without making him into something worse than he is." He paused. "Being accurate is what you taught me." A very long silence. McGonagall looked at the garden. Ptolemy had abandoned the hunt and was returning with the dignity of a cat whose failure has somehow become everyone else's problem. "I've been thinking," she said, "about next year." He waited. "My resignation from Hogwarts stands," she said. "That's not something I'm revisiting. But I've been in conversation with the Board of Governors about the position of teaching here." She paused. "Not at Hogwarts. Here. In Edinburgh. There is an appetite, apparently, for a more structured approach to supplemental magical education, students who need additional support, students who are exceptional and not being adequately stretched at school, students who for various reasons require a different kind of learning environment. She looked at him. Griselda Marchbanks has been rather insistently supportive of the idea. You'd set up a school. Harry said. Something smaller than a school, she said. A practice. Like a medical practice, but for education. She looked at him. You'd be one of the first students. Not a charity case, not because of what's happened. Because you are genuinely, specifically exceptional and you are not being adequately stretched at Hogwarts, and I have felt this way since your first Transfiguration lesson and it has taken me 3 years and a resignation to actually act on it. He looked at her. He thought about the Transfiguration classroom and the specific feeling of getting something right in it, the satisfaction of precision, the clarity of a thing that either worked or didn't. Would I still go to Hogwarts? He said. Of course. This would be supplemental. Evenings. Weekends. The holidays. She looked at him. I won't pretend there isn't also a practical element. You are Harry Potter and there is a Dark Lord who is, however diminished, not gone, and the more you know before that becomes a more immediate problem, the better. She said this plainly because that was how she said everything and because they had both, in the last month, stopped pretending that this particular future was not coming. Voldemort, Harry said. Yes, she said. He's coming back. I think so, she said. I don't know when or how. Neither does anyone else, not reliably. But his magic persists, his followers persist, and history suggests that when a dark wizard of that power is reduced rather than destroyed there is usually a reconstitution. She met his eyes. Which is why you are going to be the best prepared 13-year-old in Britain by September. Lupin said you'd do this, Harry said. He said when McGonagall makes a decision about something she discharges it completely. Lupin talks too much, she said. He said you'd say that too, Harry said. She gave him the look. The full one. The classroom look. He looked back at her with the expression he'd developed over the last month, the one that acknowledged the look while being entirely unintimidated by it, and after a moment the look broke and became something else and she shook her head very slightly. Go and get your Transfiguration textbook, she said. It's Saturday, he said. Yes, she said. And? He went and got his Transfiguration textbook. Hermione came back the following week. She came officially this time, by flu, with her parents' blessing and a bag that was even more unreasonably packed than last time, and she had a list of questions for Lupin about the word analysis appendix that she'd apparently been refining for the past 2 weeks and was prepared to defend aggressively. She also had a letter from Ron. She gave it to Harry in the garden and tactfully went inside, which was unlike Hermione and therefore indicated that she'd read the letter and knew what was in it. He opened it. Ron's handwriting was Ron's handwriting, big, slightly uneven, the handwriting of someone whose thinking moved faster than his pen. Harry, Mum finally told us what happened. All of it. She sat us all down at breakfast last Tuesday and read it out, the bit from the paper, and then she told us what she knew. It was, well. You know, Mum. I didn't know. I want you to know I didn't know. I mean I knew something was off, you never talked about them and you always ate like you hadn't in a while and things like that, but I didn't know properly. I should have asked. I don't know what to say that's useful. I'm rubbish at this kind of thing, Hermione's better at it, she'll probably say whatever needs to be said more correctly than me. What I want to say is that you're my best mate and I'm sorry I didn't ask and I think McGonagall is bloody brilliant and if you need anything at all we're here and Mum says you can come to the Burrow any time, she actually said any time and underlined it 3 times which means she really means it. Also Sirius being free is the best news I've heard in approximately forever. Tell him I said so. Ron P.S. Fred and George said to tell you, and I'm quoting directly here, tell Harry he's an absolute legend and also to bring his firebolt when he comes. Harry folded the letter. He sat with it for a moment. He thought about the Burrow, the warmth of it, the chaos, the specific loud generosity of a family that didn't have much and gave it freely anyway. He thought about Mrs. Weasley, who cried at platform 9 3/4 and once sent him a Christmas jumper, and he thought about Fred and George, who had never in 3 years made him feel like anything other than exactly where he was supposed to be. He thought about Ron, who had not known, who was rubbish at this kind of thing, who had said so honestly and then said everything that mattered anyway. He was going to reply tonight. He was going to say, "I know you didn't know. Neither did I, properly. Come to Edinburgh. Bring Fred and George. Bring your mum if she wants." He went inside. Hermione was at the kitchen table with Lupin and the word analysis and a quill moving at a pace that suggested she had strong opinions and was prepared to express them in writing. Lupin was making the expression of a man who had done something wrong academically and was in the process of having it explained to him. Sirius was in the sitting room, which Harry could see through the open doorway. He was reading, an actual book, a novel, the kind he'd apparently been unable to get hold of in Azkaban, and Ptolemy was on his lap, and there was a glass of something on the table beside him, and his feet were up, and he looked like a person who was in the process of learning, carefully and with great attention, how to be a person again. He looked up when Harry came in and gave him the look that said all right. Without saying it. Harry gave him the look that said yes without saying it. He went to the kitchen table and sat down. He pulled out parchment and started writing to Ron. McGonagall came in from the hallway with 3 folders and set them down and looked at the assembled kitchen, Harry writing, Hermione arguing with Lupin, the sound of Sirius turning a page in the next room, Ptolemy's visible tail over the arm of the sofa, and she stood there for a moment. Harry looked up at her. She had the expression she got sometimes that he'd come to know, the one that was doing a lot of work beneath the composure, the one that meant she was feeling something she hadn't allocated a slot for in her day. He didn't say anything. She sat down, opened the top folder, picked up her quill, and started working. The ministry confirmation of the guardianship transfer arrived on day 27. Harry was in the upstairs sitting room reading when McGonagall called him downstairs. He came down and she handed him the document. Official parchment, ministry seal, formal language, his name and her name and the legal transition clearly stated. He read it. Guardianship of Harry James Potter is hereby transferred to Minerva Isabel McGonagall, effective upon signing and dating of this document. Below the ministry's seal, her signature. Below her signature, a space for his. He looked up. "You have to sign as well," she said. "It requires the agreement of the ward in cases where the ward is of sufficient age and comprehension to express informed consent." She paused. "Which you are." He looked at the document. He looked at the signature line. He thought about 11 years old and a letter appearing in unusual ways. He thought about September 1st and the Hogwarts Express and Ron's sandwiches and Hermione's bossiness and Neville's toad, all of it, the beginning of a different life in a very specific sense, not better yet, but beginning, which was something. He thought about the staff meeting he hadn't been in, the file he hadn't known she was reading, the resignation he hadn't known she was making, the moment she'd stood up and put the letter down in front of Dumbledore before he could speak. He thought, someone who does that for you is someone you can sign a document with. He signed it. She took it from him. She looked at it briefly, his signature beside hers, and something in her face settled in a way that was not visible to most people but was visible, now, to him. "Right," she said. "Lupin's coming this afternoon. We're going to start on the theory of animagus transformation." He stared at her. "You're 13, not 8, she said, already turning toward her study. "You can handle it." "That's advanced magic," he said. "That's an EWT level." "Yes," she said, over her shoulder. "So we'll start now." He looked at the kitchen, at the table with the permanently resident parchment and books, at Ptolemy in his chair, at the afternoon light coming through the Edinburgh window. He followed her. 3 weeks later, a letter arrived from Hogwarts. Not official school correspondence, personal, on plain parchment, addressed in handwriting Harry recognized and had been half expecting. Harry, I have not written before now because I was not sure what to say, and I owe you the consideration of not saying inadequate things inadequately. I am still not certain I have found adequate words, but the inadequate ones, said honestly, may be better than the perfect ones withheld. What you said at the hearing, about the plant, about the minimum amount of water, I have thought about almost every day since. Not because it shamed me, though it did. Because it was true, and because you were the one who said it, and because the truth said by the person to whom it applies is a very different thing from the truth said by anyone else. I believed I was doing what was necessary. I still believe parts of this. But I have come to understand, slowly and with considerable resistance, that necessity is not the same as good, and that I have spent many years eliding the difference. This is not an excuse. It is an admission. I am told you are well. I hope you are well. I hope your godfather is also well. I hope Professor McGonagall knows that whatever the circumstances of her departure, she was the best of us for a very long time and continues to be. I am not asking you to forgive me. I am not certain forgiveness is mine to ask for. I am telling you that I am sorry, in the way that sorry means something specific and consequential rather than simply uncomfortable. Your friend, despite everything, if you will have it, Albus Dumbledore. Harry read this twice. He sat at the kitchen table with it, in the late afternoon light. He thought about everything the letter was. It was honest, which surprised him. It was careful, which didn't. It was the letter of a man who was accustomed to being right and was in the process of learning what it felt like not to be, which was a slow and genuine process that he could see in the writing, in the way it moved through its own argument with the patience of something worked out rather than performed. It was not enough. He knew this. Sorry didn't put the ribs back. Sorry didn't retrieve 12 years from Sirius. Sorry was a beginning, not a completion, and he wasn't going to pretend otherwise. But it was something. It was something true, offered with the specific vulnerability of a man who had spent decades being untouchable and was choosing, here, to be touched. He picked up his quill. He wrote, Professor Dumbledore, thank you for writing. I've read it carefully. I'm not ready to talk about forgiveness. I might be someday, and I might not be. I don't know yet, and I'm going to be honest rather than polite about it. You were right that I'm alive. You were wrong about what that meant. I think you know this now. I'm going to be fine. I think you know this too. Harry, he sealed it. He sent it. He sat in the kitchen and listened to the house around him, Sirius talking to Lupin in the sitting room, something philosophical about the nature of animagus transformation that was becoming an argument, the particular quality of their arguing which sounded like conflict but was actually the sound of two people who had known each other for 20 years and were profoundly comfortable. McGonagall moving in her study, the steady careful sound of someone working, building something. Hermione would be back at the weekend. Ron was coming on Tuesday, him and the twins and possibly his mother, which meant the kitchen was going to be considerably louder and McGonagall was going to look at the chaos with an expression of controlled tolerance that was actually, Harry now understood, extremely fond. He had a transfiguration session in an hour. Advanced theory. McGonagall had described the curriculum she was designing for him with the compressed enthusiasm of someone who had been waiting years to teach without institutional constraints, and what she was describing made him feel the way looking at a very difficult Quidditch problem felt. The specific combination of intimidated and thrilled. He was going back to Hogwarts in September. He would walk in different from how he'd left, not because the school was different, but because he was, because the weeks in Edinburgh had done something to him that was not dramatic or clean or simple but was real. He would sit in his classes and he would still be Harry Potter with all that entailed, the scar, the weight, the thing that was coming. None of that was gone. But he would also be Harry Potter who slept until 9 on important mornings. Who signed his own guardianship papers. Who knew the theory of animagus transformation at 13 because someone had decided he could handle it and offered it without hesitation. Who had people who would come back for him. Who had a kitchen table with his name on it, in a manner of speaking. Not literally, he wasn't 13 in a sentimental way, he wasn't carving initials anywhere. But in the way that a place is yours when someone has made room in it for you deliberately, when the space was shaped around your presence and would notice your absence. He had that. He had it in a way that was new and still slightly strange to touch, like a bone that has healed and is strong now but remembers its break, but new and strange didn't mean fragile. He had it and it was real and it was going to hold. McGonagall appeared in the kitchen doorway. 15 minutes, she said. I've set up the workroom. I'll be there, he said. She looked at him for a moment with the look she had, the one that wasn't composed so much as it was complete, the look of someone who has made a decision and is not second-guessing it. Good, she said. She went back to the workroom. He finished his tea. He got up. He went to learn.